Greaves. Okay, that was good. So now it's doing a blue wheel of death. No, that's good. Okay. So that is our session. So thinking about net carbon zero. So we're going to have Richard Wang and Sharry Tseng as our first two presenters to talk about the conference timing optimization tool. So welcome you two. Turn it on the side.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here today. And my name is Sharry. And today, Richard and I are going to present how we can optimize conference timing. As you can see, we have so many participants in this project from various disciplines. So like we have Professor James Hyam, who is also the principal investigator of this project. And we are going to focus on the introduction and the background of this research. And James also wanted to send his apology for not being here today because he's in another meeting in Christchurch. And we also have Ray and Craig from Sustainability Office. So they are going to offer us with the perspectives from university management so they can ensure our tool is really workable and realistic in the real world. And last, we have some important people like Associate Professor David Ayers, Associate Professor Brent and Richard here. They are from computer science. So they are like experts in optimization research. So they are the key people to develop the tools we are going to introduce today. And so,
be just a bit closer.
Oh.
Try it now.
Yes. So, as everyone knows, before COVID-19, academics like the professors, associate professors, lecturers, they are actually engaged in largely unrestricted air travel. And most of their trips are related to attending conferences and to build collaborations. So, but after COVID, actually most of us had the experience to advance our work without air travel. And because of this experience, people started to think how we can create a more equitable and sustainable environment for academics to exchange their knowledge, to disseminate their research. So virtual conferences started to become a very popular way for academics to disseminate their research and to interact with other people. And there are also many advantages of virtual conferences. For example, it really increased the inclusiveness. So like some academics actually don't have that much funding to go abroad to pay for the air travel ticket or to pay for the accommodations, then they can actually attend virtual conferences. And also some academics, they may have some visa issues because they cannot enter some specific countries. Then now they can attend virtual conferences. And also maybe some female academics, they cannot travel because of pregnancy or even childcare. But virtual attendance actually provide everyone with opportunities to share their research. And of course, virtual conference reduce a lot of carbon emissions. But there are also some challenges we found when hosting a virtual conference. For example, many academics found it very difficult to interact with other academics. And many of them go to a conference to find the potential collaborators for their future research. But now it seems like nothing is going to really happen when they attend anything virtually. And also, whether virtual conference brings the real equity is a really big problem. So, like I attended a conference in Wellington, and I noticed some participants, they actually need to record their presentation in advance because the place they are don't have really stable internet. So they cannot attend the conference. Even they've got the money to pay for their trip, they still cannot go because it's virtual. So, and there is a pretty close experience for us. It's when we are in New Zealand, most conferences are hosted in United States and Europe. So for us in New Zealand, it means we have to wake up, we have to attend the conference during the middle of the night. And do you think it is really fair for us to do that? So time zone difference become a really big driver of our project here. Okay.
All right, I forgot to share the screen.
Okay, so during our discussions, we actually think we need a tool to overcome these barriers, especially time zone issues. And of course, some of the barriers are not really we can do, like the best internet infrastructure. But what we can do now and here is to help the conference planners schedule their conference according to some key drivers, such as time zone. And if we can optimize the timing of the conferences, we will be able to accommodate participants from remote places and to increase the value of virtual conference and really increase the inclusiveness. So this sounds a very ambitious goal. So when we are developing this prototype tool, we thought of so many key drivers. First is, of course, it's time zone. And we hope the tool can give weighting to participants in each time zone without sacrificing anyone. And so in this tool, we can make every university as important as each other, and then to see which time zone, which time is the best time to host the conference. And there are also many other drivers arising from time zone issue. So for example, the format of the conference. So usually a conference is like a whole day event. So it means everyone needs to be there for 8 hours. And people found it very difficult to be there for 8 hours because you get screen fatigue. So you just cannot concentrate on it. So maybe if we can divide the whole day event into some smaller sessions and separate it in few days in the whole week. So no one needs to stay up late and everyone can be pretty focused during the sessions. But it's like I said, it's a prototype tool. So Richard is going to show us what we have achieved now and how the tool works.
Okay, so thanks for the introduction of this project. As she said, this app is extremely beneficial to develop. Not only will it lessen air travel pollution, lessen university fundings for academics to travel around the globe, therefore providing economically impoverished countries with equal opportunities. It will also keep these guys' productivity up as they don't have to wake up at 2 a.m. anymore. I want to make this tool as versatile as possible, meaning it will work with any institution, business, or schools as long as you provide the correct GPS coordinates and your preferred time. This was an enormous project for me as I've just started my journey through computer science. But breaking it down into bite sizes, I managed to go from this to this. This was definitely not a straightforward path, and there are many challenges along the way, and I've learned lessons from them, which I hope to pass on to others doing projects similar to this, so they don't have to go down a deep rabbit hole of nothingness. So this was my first attempt at this idea, a proof of concept to show that this idea might actually be possible, and it will look roughly something like that. Here I used a programming language called R, and the data set is manually gathered from Wikipedia of the Masariki University network. This program only has basic functions like weighing country, weighing staff number, and quality of life, but is essentially unusable unless you have some knowledge of the programming. So I try to tackle this problem in the next version. The next iteration attempted to solve this problem using a package in R called Shiny. Now, at this point, I had hit a wall because I've never heard of Shiny before. It took several weeks just to figure out the basics of how it will work. I produced version 2. I didn't change much of the background code, but added code to improve the user interface, allowing almost anyone to edit the different factors or multipliers without needing the knowledge of R. The big problem now is that I need a bigger data set to test if this program will actually work as intended, or will it crash? There's also another problem with this is that you can't weigh multipliers at the same time, meaning you can't weigh country and staff number simultaneously. Version 3, this was a nightmare for me. The most difficult and complex version to date. I was baffled by a small website called Wikipedia. Not sure if you guys have heard of it, because I had to automatically pull data from it. Now, Wikipedia is a website that is primarily built for displaying information, not for storing or organizing data. So it made this process extremely difficult. After learning another programming language called Sparkle, which allowed queries to be ran and pull data from Wikipedia, I came to the conclusion that Wikipedia was hosted by a small Chromebook in the middle of the desert because it was so disorganized. It had classes under university, which had 75 subtags, and some of them don't even contain university. For instance, I queried public universities, and the first entry that popped up was a middle school in Italy. After weeks of blood, sweat, and tears, eventually I scraped around 100 data points. Now, it's not a lot, but the most important thing is that my Sparkle skills have improved, and I had more knowledge of the backend of Wikipedia. After importing the data into the program, it surprisingly didn't crash, and it worked perfectly. I then added some user experience improvements and fixed the problem of multiple multipliers not working at the same time. Version 4. What I thought would be smooth sailing from version 3 was stopped on its tracks. I had to tackle the problem to enable multiple values of the same multiplier to be selected and find ways to import even more data. I first began adding checkboxes and sliders for individual countries, but after scrolling hours just to get to New Zealand at the very bottom of the list, I thought there had to be another way. I had to look at this problem in a different light because there were no tools in Shiny or R that provides a multi-selection option. So this was not an easy task. I had thought up the idea of freezing the table at the click of a button. Then we can add multipliers on top of that already frozen table, therefore, theoretically, allowing us to add multiple multipliers at the same time. This was definitely easier said than done. A few weeks in the drain, and I had to modify the code so much that it was just easier for me to rebuild the app from version 2. I then managed somehow to import 1,000 more universities. So this is my final product after 10 very interesting weeks. Suppose we want to plan a conference attended by all universities in the database, which is 1,000 currently. The conference will be co-hosted by United States and Russia. It is important to prioritize developing countries in this particular conference, and the draft schedule will then be sent out for universities to view. So here is a demonstration of how the app will work, given this prompt. Oh, can I? Yeah. Sweet. So
Right here. How do I get that one on that screen?
Let's start with our first host country, which is United States. We would select United States in this drop-down box, then move to country multiplier to around 3, which I found to be the sweet spot after testing. Because we want to prioritize developing countries' attendance, we would put quality of life less than 75 countries are prioritized with a 5 times multiplier. Then we will click update table. And this disgusting thing will show up and rearrange and show the summary, which shows 2 p.m. UTC time would be the most optimal given what we inputted so far. And the second place is 1 o'clock p.m. So we now want to add Russia to another as a co-host. We'll click freeze table, and then in this drop-down box, we'll click Russia and keep it as 3. Now we want to slide this back to 1 because we don't want a 10 times multiplier on countries less than 75. We will click update table again, show summary, and rearrange the table. As you can see, 2 p.m. is still the most optimal time given Russia is co-hosting, and the second place will be 3 p.m. And to send out the schedule, you just need to click download table and it will save it as a file on your computer. I think it's, yep. So I would like to first off thank my funders, everyone at the Sustainability Office for this wonderful experience. And a special thanks to Ray, Craig, and David for keeping me on track and helping me to go from Googling how to use R to developing an application that will change the way conferences are held. Thank you so much for your attention. I will pass this back to Sharry.
We really want to continue this project and keep developing this tool. So, for example, as Richard just demonstrated, now if we want to plan a conference by using this tool, all the universities in the database will be included. So actually in the future, we really want to have a function is like we only select the universities who are going to participate in the conference. So it will be more accurate and more useful for conference organizers. And also, we also want to make it become a more user-friendly, like a user-friendly tool, like we can develop it to be like an app. You can just download it on your cell phone. And we hope this is going to allow conference organizers to use it because it's going to be much easier for them. And and I also want to explain. So for example, the 2 p.m. just show up on the result. So for example, if the conference organizers, they are really keen to have a networking session, I think it's really important for the academics to network with each other. So they can actually arrange that session at 2 p.m. So it will help everyone to attend at a more reasonable hour. And so we are also very interested in knowing what other factors do you think we can add into this tool, or what factor do you think is very important for you personally? So we think this is going to strengthen our tool and help us to further develop it. Thank you so much.
Guys, cool. I just saw that the camera went out of focus for a bit, but it's gone back in focus. Cool. Next up, we've got Nicole Harper, who's going to talk to us about the LPG boilers at the university and what we can do about those. Bring them on.
Kia ora everyone, I'm Nicole and I've just completed my second year of energy management. Today I'll be talking to you about the steps that were undertaken to replace the LPG boiler and why we have made the decisions that we have made. Firstly, sizing the components. This was a lot harder than it sounds. Even though the Eccles building is a relatively new building, the data that we needed was not easy to get as one might think. After sizing, we looked at the different options to replace the boiler, taking many factors into account. Finally, after coming up with many different options, we were able to compare the carbon released, the cost of fuel required, the energy used, and the efficiencies. After looking at all these factors, we were able to make an informed decision about the best option to replace the LPG boiler with. What is the problem that replacing an LPG boiler would fix? You may be asking yourself that question, but I assure you, you're not alone. Replacing an LPG boiler is helping with the big picture idea of reducing our emissions, which will help reduce the impact of climate change. Even though the price of LPG costs less than the price of electricity, the social and environmental impacts of choosing electricity outweigh the economic factor of having to pay more. We're also going to have to pay for the price of being able to offset our emissions so that the university can reach its goal of net zero by 2030. Therefore, having to pay for the cost of emissions from LPG, which has a greater emissions factor, will in turn cost more than choosing electricity. The university is aware of the impacts of climate change is having on the world and wants to do its part to reduce the impact as much as possible. When looking at what LPG boiler to replace on campus, we were presented with this data. We can see that the Eccles building is consuming the most amount of LPG and therefore releasing the most amount of emissions. Thus, this would be a good decision to replace. Another option to make a real impact on the consumption of LPG is making a centralized system that would power multiple buildings, like making a South Campus centralized system, which would reduce consumption by 56%. Another option is to make an East Campus centralized system to eliminate 25% of consumption, but there is already talk underway for this to be done, so I've not chosen this option. Creating a centralized system will take more time than just replacing one boiler, with the boilers still having a higher emissions being released. Therefore, have decided to choose the Eccles building, allowing for 36% of consumption to be reduced significantly faster than if there was a centralized system implemented. Now that the Eccles building has been decided, we must look at the requirements needed for smooth operation. Humidification and equipment such as cage washer, sterilizer, and tunnel washer all require steam, whereas heating and district hot water does not require steam. Currently, the entire Eccles building is run on steam, even though some components do need steam. This makes for some inefficiencies in the system. The Eccles building heating and humidification needs to be kept on at the same temperature and humidification. This is to ensure that the animals inside are kept the most comfortable. When the building was designed, the pipes in the building were only designed to carry steam, so the pipes fitted will not allow for hot water. But there is not enough room in the walls for hot water pipes to be installed. So for hot water to be used, an additional pipe will need to be installed on the outside of the building. This will be an additional cost, but will be worth it to make more savings in the future. When looking at different options to consider, there are many factors that come into making a decision. Firstly, looking at the vendors in New Zealand to see if it is possible to get a product installed, looking at the efficiencies of the new heating source and ensuring they are 100% or greater. We are wanting to replace the boiler with a more efficient option than the current one to reduce the emissions being released. Looking at the cost is a very important factor to consider to see if the capital is available to fund the project. Unfortunately, the vendors did not get back to me in time, so this was not taken into consideration when making a decision. Taking the economic factor out of the equation allows us to make the best decision for the social and environmental needs. Biomass is a renewable energy source that uses renewable materials such as plants to create energy. Biomass is considered carbon neutral, as the carbon being released from the plant when it is burned is then absorbed back when the replacement plant is planted again. But there are still many problems, such as needing space for the biomass boiler, as well as space for the biomass to be stored. as well as someone having to fuel the biomass boiler on a regular basis. Even though biomass is carbon neutral, it is still releasing lots of emissions into the atmosphere, where other alternatives would result in fewer emissions. Having lots of carbon discharge into the air will not help the university reach its goal of net zero by 2030. An electric steam boiler is a good option as it can generate steam, which is one of the requirements of the building. Electric boilers can operate at 100% efficiency, so all the electricity being used is turned into steam for the building. Electric boilers are very space efficient, with them being very compact. There are lots of vendors for electric boilers in New Zealand, so logistically it's a good option to choose. Heat pumps are an extremely efficient option with efficiencies of around 300%, allowing for electricity usage to be significantly lowered, which would allow carbon savings in carbon that is being released, as well as electricity being consumed. Heat pumps cannot generate steam, so this can only be used for heating and district hot water. Many vendors can install the heat pump, so logically, this is a very good option. Hot water cylinders are unable to produce steam and have an efficiency of 100%. They are very compact and don't take up much room. Hot water cylinders can be used for heating and district hot water. I have decided to go with electric steam boiler, heat pump, hot water cylinder to make up different options for the building that meet the requirements of the building so it is able to operate smoothly. The LPG boiler in the Eccles building is well oversized for what is needed, but cannot run at a reduced load like an electric boiler could. Currently, 800,000 kgs of CO2 is being released each year. We want to significantly reduce the amount of emissions being released into the atmosphere due to the fact that the university wants to become more environmentally and socially responsible. The cost of fuel is $440,000 per year. The fuel that is being consumed is 3,500,000 kilowatt hours per year due to having a low efficiency of 76%. We have sized an electric boiler to be 1.6 megawatts big, allowing for us to find a vendor that can install this product. The carbon release is 320,000 kgs of CO2 per year, which is significantly lower than CO2 emissions from the LPG boiler. The fuel cost is $490,000 per year, which is more expensive than the LPG boiler. Heat pump and electric boiler combo 1 is the most efficient option out of all these options, with the heat pump being the most efficient, covering heating and district hot water. This then allows for the carbon usage to be at 190,000 kgs of CO2 per year and the cost of fuel at $290,000 per year, as well as a total consumption of fuel of 1,600,000 kilowatt hours per year. Heat pump and electric boiler combo 1 came out on top as all of these factors are the lowest due to having a high efficiency. Heat pump and electric boiler combo 1 is the second most efficient option, due to the heat pump only looking after a small number of kilowatt hours from the district hot water, having a carbon usage of 320 kgs of CO2 per year, a fuel usage of 2,600,000 kilowatt hours per year, and a fuel cost of $490,000 per year. Hot water cylinder and electric boiler combo 1 has an overall efficiency of 100%, which is the same as the electric boiler, but the steam is not having to be produced for the district hot water, so the steam that was previously produced will not have to turn back into hot water. This option gives us a carbon usage of 320 kgs of CO2 per year, consumption of fuel of 2,600,000 kilowatt hours per year, and a cost of fuel of $490,000 per year. Hot water cylinder and electric boiler combo 2 also has an overall efficiency of 100%, but this time the hot water cylinder will be going to heating and district hot water. So the steam that is currently being generated will not have to turn back into hot water. This option gives us a carbon usage of 320,000 kgs of CO2 per year, consumption of fuel of 2,600,000 kilowatt hours per year, and a cost of fuel of $490,000 per year. This graph shows us what the predicted cost of carbon will be going up until 2040, so that the emissions can be offset. We can see that the LPG is on top with the green line being the most expensive, then the blue line, which represents electric boiler, heat pump and electric boiler combo 2, and hot water cylinder and electric boiler combo 1 and 2. Then the orange line, which represents the heat pump and electric boiler combo 1. We can see that the orange line is the cheapest due to releasing the least amount of emissions. This graph was made on the basis that the emissions will be the same over the rest of the years, which we know not to be true, as it doesn't allow for the fact that the electricity emissions should significantly reduce due to the implementation of new renewable technologies into New Zealand's energy grid. So the blue and orange lines are the worst case scenario if the electricity grid was to gain no more renewable energies. Therefore, I've decided that heat pump and electric boiler combo 1 is the best option as it has the lowest number of emissions being released into the atmosphere. As it is the most efficient option. Even though with all the options being electrification, eventually all the emissions from electricity will be at zero when the grid is fully run on renewable electricities. But at this point, only 80% of electricity on the grid is from renewable technologies. This option is a lot more efficient than the current LPG boiler, so the emissions that have been released will significantly reduce. Converting this option means that 610 kgs of CO2 per year will be saved, as well as a saving of 1,900,000 kilowatt hours per year of fuel consumed. Even though this decision was made without the economic factor considered, the funding for the project is still needed, otherwise it cannot go ahead. ECAN is funding energy efficiency projects which will allow for Aotearoa to become more energy efficient. The university falls under the Crown Decarbonisation Fund, where up to 40% of the project, up to a maximum limit, can come out of a pool of money. The rest of the funding will come from the university, from the Decarbonisation Fund, as well as money from the Strategic Asset Management Program. Summer student research scholarships are not just about the learning, not just about the project, but about the learning and growth of our students undertaking these projects. During this project, I have learned not just about LPG boilers, but have found that real-world problems require real-world solutions. And not all the information is given to come to a solution like you were given in class. I've become more confident in my ability to send emails, as well as having a lot more practice using Microsoft Sites to further my ideas. I would like to say a massive thank you to my supervisor Arjan, as well as the team in the Sustainability Office and Property Services, and helping me throughout my project. Thank you for listening.
Good job, thanks Nicole, and Shane Jenkins, who's our energy manager, just said, well done, Nicole, thanks for your project. This is an important project, so totally agree. Okay, I will stop sharing for a moment. So next up, we have an interesting group project, and we've got two reps from that group, Linea and Jess, who are going to talk about the work they've been doing up at Mahu Whenua for the last 10 or so weeks. I'll let them talk more about how interesting and how different it is.
Yeah, our project was a bit more field-based than some of your guys' projects. So our talk, I think, will be a little bit different, but still interesting. Hopefully, we're all working towards the same thing, so it's still good. We're just going to rearrange a few slides so that it looks better. I'm Jess, and this is Linea. Hello. So I'm one of the supervisors of the project, just the Paull, along with Amy, who's not here, and Janice, who's not here.
Yep, I'm Linea. I'm one of the summer students, and the other ones are Clara, Dylan, Hannah, Finn, and Mandy. Some of them are currently out on like the final trip, trying to sort of clean up the last little bits of data collection. So we're here, and they're out in the field doing stuff.
Yeah. So yeah, our last team is still out in the field as we speak. Finishing up the project, so we don't quite have the final results to present, but we are more so going to talk about kind of the difference between designing a study on paper, like designing methodology for carbon sequestration and estimation on paper versus how it actually ends up working out in the field, and kind of like how we managed along the way. So, I'm sure you're all aware, University of Otago wants to be net zero by 2030. And they're trying to, as you all are well aware of, go about this in different ways. We're trying to mitigate carbon in any way we can. But this also includes, in a non-direct way, of carbon offsetting by planting trees. So there are some carbon costs that are impossible at the moment to completely eliminate. Like we do still have to fly at some point, we do still have to use some carbon. So we hope to offset this remaining amount by planting trees and just utilizing our regenerating forests to fulfill this. So the aim of this project was to kind of estimate how much carbon is being sequestered in native bush, and specifically for the purpose of the New Zealand emissions trading scheme. So you can see here.
I haven't shared the screen.
Oh.
Okay, you go.
So this is kind of where everybody concentrates their effort, is how it's being emitted, and kind of how we can offset that. But we kind of are more focused on the absorption point of view and trying to focus more on that realm for this particular. Yeah. So where we did this work at is a large bit of private land, Mahu Whenua, which is kind of around the Wanaka area. It is New Zealand's largest private conservation area, which is about 55,000 hectares under the Q2 Trust. So all this land is protected. Some of it is being farmed still for the owner, I believe, but a lot of it is just land that's being left alone to regenerate on its own, which is great. And because of the broad size and like the size of the area, as well as all the diverse sort of ecosystems within it, it provides, it's extensively useful for research opportunities. We have a lot of postgraduate projects that have gone on here, lots of summer projects that have gone on here, and now some carbon sequestration projects as well. So it's a really great piece of land. Settled kind of in between Queenstown and Wanaka, and like a little valley system. It's massive. Most of our work is done in the Motutapu Valley. So the entire size of the valley itself, while it is part of the Q2 covenant, most of our research happens in the Motutapu Valley section. Last summer, a project, kind of the sequel to our project, happened in the valley, and they sort of mapped the land of the soil carbon content and looked at like seeding and like methods of regenerating the land, which is less fertile, sort of. And yeah, a lot of their work was useful for our work to kind of know where to go and what to estimate, and yeah, kind of where to avoid and where to go. So thank you guys for your previous work. But our project, more so, was focused on, we had 915 waypoints that we were supposed to visit, which is a lot. And you can see them mapped here. This is the entire valley system. And this is the hut where we stayed at a few times, which is down here. And so up here, there was like 4 waypoints, which are just like the really, really tiny ones down here. And then we had the entire valley system with all 950 waypoints to do.
About that. Yeah, the arm that's going up. So the people who are out this week are just finishing up those ones. So they went up to the top and they'll be like working their way back down.
And as you'll see, it looks really big, or maybe it doesn't to you. It looks really big to me, and it is really big. So yeah, you'll see.
Each waypoint is like 25 meters apart. So the transects, some of them are quite long, like this is just a big long one, so you could kind of just go deep. all the way down, but some of the ones that are, there would be like 3 in one spot, and they would be all 20 meters apart, which is fine. And then there would be like, you'd have to walk for an hour and then get to another one that was like another 3. So some of them were very convenient. You could just go down one transect for hours, and some of them you had to sort of hop all along to get to all of the ones that you needed to finish in a day.
Yeah, so they're not all off the road. They are up mountains, in valleys, through gullies. So accessibility, I think, was our largest challenge throughout this entire project. So the methods in theory, once you get to the actual transect, I'll probably let you explain this.
So in theory, you go to the waypoint, and we had GPSs to get there. So Jess would upload the coordinates for the GPS for all the plots that we were going to do on any given trip. And we would sort of input them, follow the little arrow all the way to the point. And when we got there, we would like throw love down to mark the middle, and we'd put 2 meters all around. And within that 2 meters, we would count the number of native trees, and we would take samples, because we would sort of identify them. We'd say, oh, there's 3 Manuka here, there's 3 Matagauri or whatever. And then we'd take IDs so that they could double check that we had actually ID'd them correctly. And then we would find the biggest tree in the plot. And if it was greater than 10 centimeters in diameter, or if it's a cabbage tree, you would measure DBH, which is diameter at breast height. So right about here, we had a special tape so that we didn't have to do the calculations in our head, and measure height. And the reasons that cabbage tree are on that is they don't have tree rings. So if we cut them down, it wouldn't tell you anything.
Yeah.
But if they were less than 10 centimeters, we would cut the tree down and then cut a little disc out. Some of them were like that, most of them are a bit smaller. And then we'd bag that up and put it and identify it as well.
Yeah.
And
So that's
so that's pretty much how it was supposed to work, which we'll get to in a minute how it did work.
And the
or not.
height and age of the tree is what helps you estimate how much carbon it's sequestering. So that's why it was important, unfortunately, to cut down the tree.
Yeah. So this is the team. This is, I think we were missing one person in this group photo. Hannah's not in it. But yes, there's Jo. She joined us for one of our trips. There's me. Clara, and then Hannah's up in the corner. And that's Dylan. We've got Mandy and Finn. Oh, and then there's Jess and Amy. And Mandy's holding the saw that we would use to cut stuff down. So it's like this, it had a little sheath, you'd like walk along with it on your belt. Felt very adventurous. And we were all in wonderful high vis. Yes. Hats and glasses. It was very bright and sunny out. So yeah, here's us. This is kind of what it would look like. So usually one person we had a clipboard and like a spreadsheet printed out, and one person would kind of take notes and the other person would go around like counting things, and we would take turns doing the cutting down and doing the navigating and stuff. And we had walkie-talkies, so we could call in when we were done a certain transect, or if we were having trouble, and we could ask for advice or be like, hey, give us another thing to do, because we're still we still have time in the day.
Most valuable tool.
We almost didn't have the walkie-talkies. We brought them on as like, oh, this will be like a fun little like, hee, we're gonna use walkie-talkies. And they were probably the best thing we brought on the trip, because when you're out, there's no signal really. So when you're out in the middle of nowhere, if all of a sudden, like we had a group get kind of stuck in like a place that they were like, oh, we don't know if we should go down like this side of the mountain or the other side. And they didn't get back till like 9. It was very
9 o'clock at night.
hard, tough day for them. But if we hadn't had walkie-talkies, we would have probably hit the emergency button at like 6, because we wouldn't have known what had gone on when they didn't come back. Yeah, so.
Yeah, but as you can see, maybe off of the methods using a 2 meter radius, oh, that's easy. I'll cut down the trail, that's easy. But it's not always on a flat terrain. Like, I don't know if you can tell, but some of these are like straight down a hill, or like in massively dense shrubs. Like sometimes you guys had to be like upside down on hands.
Yeah, one of the hardest ones I cut down was like the tree was growing horizontally out of a bank. So there was nothing to like, I had to like brace my knee into the bank and like lean on it, and it's like I was like, this is this is very dodgy, but
And after like 6 hours of just trying to get to the plot.
yeah,
Like,
they're like, oh, there's nothing here.
Yeah.
So that's what we got. Yeah, so this is the methods in reality: steep slopes and scratchy shrubs. You can see the top two photos on the left and right are trees that have like kind of fallen over.
Fallen out of the soil because yeah, the soil can be quite unstable.
Yeah.
So you're like, oh, I'm just walking on a very slow hillside, and you're like, that tree is on its side, as is the entire hillside.
And on our most recent trip, we discovered poison no, which is wild parsnip,
Yeah.
or
Castinica sativa.
and it is phototoxic, which means that if you get the juices on your skin and you're in the sun, it gives you blisters.
Yeah,
So like we didn't go there.
Yeah,
It
it's
not
also a cliff.
We crossed off a whole lot of plots because we were like, oh, there's wild parsnip there. We're not gonna get like chemical burns to cut down some trees. But yeah, like really beautiful scenery. But yeah, nice, good and challenging. So this is some context for the next photos. Is there was a big snow last winter. I think that you can't really see the tape measure thingy, but that says 400 millimeters. So I think it sat there for a while, and then it caused things like slips and falls. So
This is, yeah, more accessibility woes.
yeah, so this was a few areas. Slips and falls.
Yeah, so this, like, it's kind of frustrating because it never really shows in the picture, but this, like,
I think this is the best picture, the second one from the right on the bottom.
he's leaning on the wall is the ground.
Yeah, so
So-
it was a big slip, it had washed out, and we were trying to get to plots. Over here, we were trying to get to ones there, and we had already crossed the river and we didn't want to have to cross it again, so we were like, oh, we'll go along the top. Oh, do you have is this a thingy? Oh, okay, so we were gonna go up and then go along the top and then try and like drop down to do the plots. But Finn was like walking along the top and the rocks were like kind of sliding
Yeah.
down the hill under him
Down into the river below.
into the river. So
Hmm.
one of the skills we learned on this trip is how to get places more safely, and sometimes the most direct route is not the best one. So we came back this way and then we climbed up somewhere else and then got to the top safely and looked down and we're like, those are all really steep washed out bits.
Yeah.
Other examples, this is me, that's my hat. Dylan, this is his foot. He's standing up here and I'm probably like, at least, yeah, so I'm like fully below him, if not, there's probably like another half a meter above me. And that was a bank that there was a little kind of deer trail or like sheep trail going down. So it was safe enough to get down, but that's kind of an example of if there hadn't been, you could have just sort of walked off the edge and been like, oh, delightful. Same thing here. Is this where Hannah was standing here?
Yeah, so basically some of the plots is like, man, the bush is so dense, how do you get in there? Do you guys know what bracken is, bracken fern? So basically, sometimes bracken grows and then dies, grows and dies, yeah. The bracken was so tall, where she's pointing is where you had to climb and stand on, to walk into the bush. So you're actually walking on top of trees, not through the trees. So we
This
kind of
is
had to eliminate that
Another one, I think this is maybe Finn, this is one of our plots, and oftentimes we would just be like, just climbing on top of trees that were kind of like laying on their side, and some of it was so dense that you could just, if you were standing on like a trunk, you could just kind of bounce your way across. But yeah, so that was some of our challenges, was navigating that kind of terrain. But it was also immensely beautiful. One big long trip we did for a week, we had to actually camp out on the other side of the river because it just made more sense to be able to get to the plots. We didn't want to have to drive all the way around and up every day. So we camped for a few days. And this was like the view from our campsite in the evening and in the morning and then during the day.
It's beautiful.
So yeah.
Magnificent.
Mountain.
Yeah.
Yeah, like just stunning. And we would be up in the hillsides, like looking at everything and kind of being in awe of all of
Yeah,
it.
you're tired, you're sweaty, you're stinky, but
Yeah.
at least you get to look at that.
I think I sat down in the bracken and took this photo, so I just like was like this and the bracken was like here. Yeah, most of the time it was pretty sunny. This is food. This isn't even all the food we got for 4 people on one of the trips. There was more in the front seat, like at my feet, probably 3 or 4 more bags of stuff. So we had a lot of snacks to keep us going.
Yeah. Your stamina wears out pretty fast on a 30-degree day with no shade.
Yeah. Yeah.
Climbing mountains through the bracken. It's not the most fun to climb up a bracken.
Bracken also, its stems are like kind of furry. And so you'll be walking through it and it'll make this like dust. It'll just like go up your nose.
In your mouth, in your nose,
Yeah.
on your clothes.
But, so now we have a game for you guys. Spot that field worker. There's a few field workers in this photo. See if you can find them. If you give us, maybe like a few people give us a guess, then we'll reveal where they are. Any thoughts?
They're wearing high vis.
Yeah, we were wearing high vis the whole time.
It just goes to show how hard it can be. Like even with high vis, sometimes these shrubs, like it doesn't look like they're that tall, but really they are taller than you. So it's quite hard to see them. Do we have any takers?
Guesses?
Just
You wanna
reveal.
reveal?
Oh, we have one taker.
Oh, I can see.
It might be the little belt. Somewhere in the gully. Yeah.
Close-up shots. Here they are.
Another one.
Anyone spot the field worker?
This
They're a
plot.
bit more out in the open in this one.
Yeah, it took them 4 hours to get there.
In the middle.
It sounds so vague.
Yeah.
Mine's sort of the middle is it open to the right.
It's the open
Yeah,
bed.
yeah.
Yeah.
That one?
Yeah.
I further down.
Oh. There they are.
Go Hannah.
I think there's, gosh.
Yeah, this one's pretty hard.
Yeah, this one's hard. They're somewhere in the middle.
I can see it.
Yeah.
Yay.
There they are. There's the high bits. I think there's just one in the middle.
Oh, yeah, this one's hard.
This one is also hard. So would this have been the same people working their way down
Yeah.
the gully?
Yeah, so this took them like an hour to get through as well.
Yeah. So sometimes we would like walk for an hour to get up because we always would tend to go to the top and work our way down because it was
So much easier.
so much easier than like slowly climbing up. But sometimes you'd get up there and then you'd be like, oh, we actually can't really do any of these.
Yeah.
So
This is
then you
why
just have, like,
walkie-talkies.
a nice walk for a day.
Yeah. This is the importance of
Oh,
walkie-talkies.
there you go.
Hannah's white hat.
She had this beautiful white hat that was like brown by the end of the, it was, you know, like beige, kind of like covered in bracken fern dust and little like seeds. Yeah, so I guess that sort of shows that, especially if you do anything that's a field-based course or degree, but writing a methods and implementing a methods are very different things, especially in terrain like that. But we managed to survey over half of the original waypoints. And we have lots of tree discs that ECOS is the consultancy that made the maps and got all the coordinates for us. So they will, I think, sort of finalize it. We were just the people doing the actual field work for them. Yeah, but like it was a lot of fun. It's sort of like tramping, like it's hard and it's sweaty and you're tired, but you're like, dang, that was a good time. I'm glad I did that.
That's good.
Thanks for listening. This is something outline. Yeah.
Amazing, thank you both. Can you just stay there and Nicole, Richard and Sharry, if you want to jump on the seats as well, and we'll move straight into our panel. Stop sharing. Play around with the camera. And while I'm doing that, has anybody in the room got a question to kick us off? And if you're online, just put your hand up or put something in the chat, and we'll ask this group. You know, broad topics. But I think there might be a few connections in there. Okay, I'll get you started while everyone's putting their thinking caps on. You mentioned in the first presentation was to do with online conferencing and reducing air travel. the last one was kind of linked in some ways, that some of the funding came from the university's air travel project and how we offset what we can't avoid. Do you have anybody on the panel, do you have any reflections on, I guess, on, and Nicole, you also mentioned the cost of offsetting the emissions for the LPG. Do you have any reflections on, I guess, how hard we should go on getting rid of the emissions in the first place before we resort to the hard work that it takes to grow trees, particularly in hilly parts of New Zealand? Do you have any reflections on that, but also maybe what the other benefits are from a native forest regeneration project?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that native bush restoration outside of carbon has so many other benefits that it's worthwhile even outside of the carbon sequestration angle. It has so many factors that influence the climate. It's kind of like a positive feedback loop. So growing native forests retains more water, cools the planet down, has so many benefits outside of just carbon sequestration. And which is something we noticed about our project, is that in some ways the method seemed a bit designed for like forestry plantations. It wasn't really designed for native bush, and we were able to tell. So maybe methods designed more for native bush that examine beyond just like tree height and width and are more designed for our native species, not just tall pine trees, would be
more like density, or I don't know, because some of the spots were really dense that you couldn't even like get under the stuff. So
yeah.
Or sometimes we'd have a transect that would go straight down, like basically kind of like a grassy field, and you'd be like, there's all this stuff there and there, but it's not going to get counted because of like the placement of this specific line.
Yeah, so I feel like carbon measuring would be a bit more accurate with more specifically design methods, which is kind of what you guys were talking about. And the way you design something is very important.
Was there much animal destruction and regrowing?
I think I saw a tree that had been like, the bark had been scraped off by either like a deer, like scraping, itching its head.
Yeah, there was lots of possum damage and some pig tearing up the soil and stuff, but honestly, most of the damage we came across, at least in what I experienced, was from the snowfall. Yeah, and like where there is just pasture, the soil is not really able to hold itself together as well. And so when you start having trees grow through that, it's still not very stable yet, which is why they all fell down on those like slopes, because it's just regenerating bush, so it's not like advanced. It can't sustain itself yet, so it's very delicate. So I think we saw a lot.
I've got a question. I think Richard used the phrase of deep rabbit hole of nothingness. I think you've all gone down deep rabbit holes of somethingness and engaged with this as students. I'd love to have more students engage with the same way. How could we tell the stories like you've got or wildlife? What's the best way to do that so that we actually engage more with these incredible things and ideas?
I feel like maybe you could, I'm not sure how you guys were giving your projects, but maybe if you, instead of assigning projects, ask people what they wanted to work on or something, you might find a lot of passion. Like some people are really, really passionate about some very hyper-specific area and sustainability. You might find some really projects. Like I don't know how you felt about energy before this project, unless you're interested beforehand or if you have an interest after. Yeah, like if you start off with the interest and then that might be cool.
Whereabouts is your program now? So you've got it to moving forward. Is it being trialed, or is it just sitting waiting for further funding? Because I was seeing when you're preparing conferences, how beneficial it would be. It would be a shame for it to just sort of be sitting here now, waiting for something to happen.
Hopefully extra funding, but I can always put it online and someone else can continue the project. Someone else. No, I would love to stay on this project if I can.
Have you tried it at all?
I think Ray gave me a prompt, like a real life one. Yeah, read that.
We're looking at sustainability get together for staff at Matariki universities. So, the next stage is actually trying to take some imaginary conferences or scenario conferences, run them through the app to see what it's going to make. So we ran it through the app.
Trying partnering with some of your sister universities.
That's the matter.
That's all. Yeah, thank you.
Anyone online, or maybe over here, see anyone online got any questions? Anyone else in the room?
Yeah, thanks. No, I'm thinking about sort of the applicability beyond the university in the conference. I'm thinking about the elderly buildings. Do you know how widespread elderly buildings are around Australia? As my regional council, know that.
I'm not too sure about around the university, around like Otago, but around the university is still a few, and we've just chosen this one because it's like reduce the amount of emissions the most. But yeah, I think there's probably still be a few, but I'm not exact.
Probably the BCC and regional council stock takes of emission tax.
Yeah, there was a comment from Jinty from the DCC saying that that's exciting from the city's perspective as well. Nicole speaking.
To show what value can be got in terms of production emissions from those.
Did some similar work on Southland, mainly focused on industrial processing and LPG sources.
Let's all just thank all the participants again. So we've got a bit of time before the next session starts, and we should all take the opportunity to get up and stretch and go outside. So if we can come back, it's 2:36 at the moment. We'll stick to the schedule, and if we're back here at 10 to 3, and then we'll get running, talking about things like cultural considerations of climate change, green hydrogen, alternative proteins, understanding food loss and waste, and perceptions of Te Araroa, the Great Walks of New Zealand. So back here at 10 to 3. Thanks.
Thank you.
Just coming together. So everyone's just filtering back into the room and we'll get started in about 1 minute. Cool, Kaila, you
Can you teach me how to do that?
yeah. So it's just click it forward, and back it through. This one should be the laser. You've got two buttons. Okay, awesome. Thanks, everybody. Welcome back into the room. Welcome to a few new faces to the fourth and final session of our Pūhau Aratera Symposium for 2023. Really exciting to wrap up with a wide-ranging topics. So we'll have, I think, at least 3, possibly 4 speakers, depending on who turns up. And we'll get through the presentations and we'll do a panel at the end. So save your questions for the panel at the end. But now I hand over to Kaila. Thank you.
Kia ora, I'm Kaila and I work alongside Daisy Thompson-Fawcett and my supervisor Michelle Thompson-Fawcett for the last 10 weeks on a scoping project looking at cultural considerations related to climate change and transition on the University of Otago Ōtepoti campus. So to start off, we identified 3 main issues within this space. The first issue was Indigenous communities are sensitive to climate change. This was obvious across a plethora of literature. Our second theme was risk to culture, where risk to Māori culture, heritage, and social structures have been identified as major or extreme in the National Climate Change Assessment. And the last issue here was that climate change discussions typically exclude the cultural paradigm. This is evident in climate change research, which typically follows a westernized reductionist lens and excludes Indigenous knowledge. So although it is obvious to have scientific truths within climate research, it is also important to acknowledge locally specific Indigenous knowledge. So overall, initiating this work like this project can form the foundation to start addressing these issues and promote the inclusivity of cultural risk and climate change conversations. So from that, we decided that our scoping project needed to consider how to incorporate the perspectives of mana whenua and cultural elements in the realization of climate change adaptation on the University of Otago campus. So to do this, we came up with 3 objectives. Objective 1 looked at identifying how to think about cultural adaptation to risk on the Dunedin campus. Objective 2 looked at identifying the cultural features physically evident on the Dunedin campus. And objective 3 looked at identifying some key perspectives and recommendations related to climate change adaptation on the Dunedin campus for future work with mana whenua. Okay. So moving on, we had 5 prominent themes come up within our literature surrounding Indigenous peoples and climate change adaptation. So our first theme looked at Indigenous peoples face disproportionate effects from climate change. And this is shown with Indigenous cultures are universally vulnerable and typically the first to bear the brunt of climate change-induced challenges. The second theme was holism and interconnectivity, where Indigenous people have long and multi-generational histories of interactions with environments that include coping with environmental uncertainty, change, and variability. 3 looked at there is a need to be included. This is evident in the growing number of local government practitioners now recognising how Māori worldviews have the potential to inform frameworks when considering long-term issues. The 4th theme was the effectiveness of Indigenous peoples' knowledge and practice. As direct users of the natural environment, Indigenous people have valuable and experiential knowledge at a regional level on the ecosystem and the ecosystem services. And the last theme looked at who is responsible. So although it is evident that Indigenous people are adapting or have started adapting to climate change, it is not their sole responsibility to start adapting, and that it is a responsibility of the collective. Okay, so I'm going to move on to 2 case studies which substantiate these themes. We have summarized these down quite a lot, but they will be in our research report. Okay, so climate change has profoundly affected Arctic Scandinavian areas where Sami herders and reindeers preside. So reindeer are a valuable resource for the Sami as they are food, clothing, used for trade and labour. However, harsher Nordic winters have created unfavourable conditions for reindeer fodder and ground lichens. Therefore, Sami herders have intervened and used observational and experiential knowledge through tactical responses such as supplementary feeding and moving to improve the conditions for the reindeer. So what does this all mean? This shows that vulnerable Indigenous communities like the Sami are effectively adapting due to their connection with the natural resources and their environment, and that there's a growing impetus within the space of Indigenous adaptation and climate change. So in relation to our scoping project, the University of Otago has the opportunity to become more actively involved within this space for cultural considerations and also for forging greater relationships with mana whenua. This is to achieve greater social and cultural and environmental aspirations. So moving on to our second case study, which is grounded in New Zealand. Katihuirapa is a local hapu that is working on inaka restoration in the Waikuaiti catchment. This is because there's a growing vulnerability for mahika kai and because of the decreasing wetlands. So inaka holds social, environmental, cultural and economic importance to Katihuirapa and surrounding communities. So they have partnered with New Zealand National Science Challenge Bioheritage to develop a strategy for future sustainability. They found that increased flooding events and sea level rise will actually be beneficial and that switching to exotic grasses created more favourable conditions for the inaka. So therefore, Indigenous communities evaluate their priorities to suit the current situation. And this shows that they've reached compromises to uphold and restore the modi of their area and the aspirations for the mana whenua. So for the University of Otago, this case study is valuable as it demonstrates how engaging with mana whenua can restore the modi or the life force of the area and highlights the significance of rivers as a resource such as mahika kai. This understanding of restoration can be applied to the ore field. So moving on to Māori research approaches. This table demonstrates three main approaches to research with Māori. On the right, there is little to no engagement with Māori, but as you move across the table, you can see that there's more engagement with Māori communities and Māori members. So for this research project, we have taken a kaupapa Māori research approach. This is important as it aligns most with Te Ao Māori and the aspirations of Māori, which will be significant in decolonising methodologies. All right. So to address objective one, we advise that when conducting research, kaupapa Māori research practices need to be implemented and carefully considered. So these practices include aroha ki te tangata, a respect for people, kanohi kitia, the seen face, and making sure you communicate face to face. Titiro, whakarongo kōrero, look, listen, speak, be actively involved. Manaki ki te tangata, share and host people, be generous. Kola I takahia te mana o te tangata, do not trample on the mana of the people. Kia mahiki, do not flaunt your knowledge. Kia tūpatoa, be cautious, and whakamihi ki te tangata, pay tribute and acknowledge people. These practices ensure that the relationship between the researcher and participants are genuine, non-exploitative and respectful. So our first result, which aims to address objective 2, was just a basic interactive map of the Dunedin campus. So each pinpoint has the geographic location and provides coordinates, a description and a picture of each culturally relevant thing. To have a better look at this, you can access it on the link provided. So our next area will look at addressing objective 3. So we have prescribed pseudonyms for each of our mana whenua participants, calling them manukara, which directly translates to a person held in high esteem. So this section will follow an ascending list of results and recommendations, moving from the more easily attainable goals to the more longer-term aspirations. So the first result and recommendation that we found is that the university needs to commission a detailed cultural narrative for the university site. So Manukura 1 stated the university needs a cultural narrative. Manukura 2 adds that they think that a cultural narrative would be quite useful and it would give the university a general picture, or more specific in some cases, of what the landscape actually is. And then Manukura 3 emphasised that it would provide a basis to build, not just for climate change, but for many things. So commissioning a cultural narrative is important as it tells the histories and the stories which shape our idea of place. This narrative will need to be detailed and constructed under the gauze of local runaka, as well as mana whenua who have expertise surrounding the campus site. So our next result and recommendation is to increase greening and the incorporation of native flora. Manukura 1 stated, I think the university needs to consider planting and properly reinstating planting that's from here, so it flourishes. Manukura 2 poses the question, oh no, what am I on about? Manukura 2 said, I think more greening. We've got these massive buildings that at the moment they are wasted opportunities. The quotes highlight the potential to reinstate native plants in this area and bring back the ecology that was originally here. This may attract back local fauna such as kereru and wood pigeons, incorporate rongoa or medicinal plants, reintroduce Māori ideas of mahika kai, and promote more biophilic spaces. So the third result or recommendation is that adaptation can be seen or achieved by looking at the state of our awa, or rivers. Manukura 1 states, it will give you a real indication of what the water quality is, because that's the beating heart of our university. Manukura 2 poses the question, how are you going to recognise the mauri of the river in terms of its usefulness and place within the university system? And lastly, Manukura 3 substantiates these points by stating, water is, and the things in the water are, indicators of things that are going on. So it's a lead indicator and you can physically see it. Moving on, lastly, Manukura 2 identified the need for kotahitanga between the university and local mana whenua, placing emphasis on being a treaty-led and honouring campus. They state, if we are going to have a true partnership with mana whenua, the university really needs to uphold the treaty and have a treaty-based environment. This Manukura also mentioned how a bicultural model has been successful in Rotorua and could give our campus an idea of what an equitable position may look like. Okay, so on the basis of the themes produced in our literature review and the conversations that we've had with our Manukura, we need to acknowledge that Indigenous people are bearing the brunt of climate change and that their knowledge and interconnectedness with the land is important to incorporate. And it's also essential to include Indigenous communities and mana whenua in this kind of work, as they'll be the most informed about the history and cultural significance of the university campus area. Additionally, they'll have a better idea of the intrinsic and extrinsic value of culturally relevant features on the campus, which will be effective in understanding what to prioritise and what will bring or uphold the mauri of our campus. So I've provided the summarised key recommendations there. All right. So this scoping project has functioned as a building block for the university to start considering cultural risk and climate change adaptation. So here are a few take-home points. Firstly, it is implicit within discussion that there needs to be considerations around te tiriti o Waitangi and the implications of colonisation. Secondly, long-term collaboration and fostering genuine relationships with mana whenua will propel the narrative of being treaty-led and honouring campus. Thirdly, Indigenous communities have centuries of highly localised, specific and detailed environmental knowledge. Therefore, Indigenous inclusion is critical to adaptation. The last point here has to do with the idea of climate responsibility. While the responsibility to adapt to climate change is held by all people across the world, people in leadership positions need to be facilitating positive and inclusive change. So I want to end here with a small whakatauki, and it goes like this. Mamua ka kite a muri, ma muri ka ora a mua. Those who give sight to those who follow, those who lead give sight to those who follow, and those who follow give life to those who lead. This whakatauki speaks to the idea of working together. It acknowledges the value and importance of both the leader and the follower, for both are essential and codependent. So thank you for listening.
So up next, we've got Caelum, who's going to talk about green hydrogen. Yeah, it's really interesting.
Awesome. So mine was on the New Zealand media presence of green hydrogen. So we were looking at like, what is green hydrogen's presence? What do people see when they look at it in the New Zealand media? So green hydrogen is a fuel, hydrogen fuel is a fuel source that's often, it's up on the rise. It's something that's being used more and more around the world. Green hydrogen in particular is made from renewable energy. So whenever you make hydrogen, you require quite a lot of electricity to create the hydrogen from water using electrolysis. Green hydrogen is made using renewable energy, which is something New Zealand generates a lot of. So we were quite interested in whether or not this was going to be something that it's coming into the country a lot more. We've got a lot of green hydrogen plants planned. We were curious to see if what people are going to be seeing about it and if people were actually interested in it. So we gathered about 50 articles or so from major online New Zealand news sources because we wanted to see what most people would be seeing rather than going off to some of the more niche areas and looking at some of the more obviously skewed areas. We just wanted to get a general idea of what most New Zealanders were likely to be seeing if they just, Google green hydrogen out of curiosity or if it just popped up on their news feed somewhere. So we knew that public knowledge was really low. So we didn't really have many options for moving forward, in terms of just doing public surveys and things like this. So this gives us a really good understanding of what is out there, although we can't directly draw the conclusions of what people are going to get from this. There were some strong limitations on it, but it does give us a pretty good idea of what people are going to be seeing, what people are likely to see. So we used discourse analysis to go through the articles and deeply analyze each of them so we could see what were the kind of dominant narratives, what were the themes. We were mainly looking at repetition and things that were coming through a lot of narratives, because on an individual level, people are probably going to read one or two articles and take from that article what the article says or what some of the surface level things are. However, because we don't really have a way of telling what people are actually going to take from the articles or what articles they're going to see, we can, by looking at repetition and seeing what dominant themes and dominant narratives come through in the discourses, we can get a general idea of what the average New Zealander is going to see and what the most, the overall impressions are going to be within most people who look at these articles. So we weren't looking for quantifiable data. Most of what we were looking for was only stuff we could find through linguistic discourse analysis. However, we did find some, and there was some very useful stuff. So we've lumped them into supportive, skeptical, and critical. So supportive was kind of the more positive articles. Skeptical was neutral. They kind of argued both sides, but there wasn't a strong sway one way or the other. And critical articles were more on the negative side of things. So despite the fact that supportive takes up quite a big portion of these articles, it wasn't overwhelming. So we see that there's definitely still healthy debate going on within the media sphere here, and it's not just overwhelmed by one of these discourses, but it does show that we do have a positive slant. The other thing, though, is despite the fact that we have more positive articles, the headlines and the introductory paragraphs of the negative articles were much stronger. So even if there's more supportive articles out there, the critical articles are more likely to be drawing in an audience. So it's hard to say which way it's going to lean just from this alone. We also found that most of these describe green hydrogen as transformative. Whether that's a good or a bad thing, whether they were skeptical or whether they were supportive or they were critical of green hydrogen, about 3/4 of the articles decided and stated quite clearly that they thought this was going to be a transformative technology. What this means is, regardless of how New Zealanders are seeing green hydrogen and what they're hearing about it, they're likely to be seeing it as an important, as a transformative, as quite a technology that's going to have quite an impact on the country. So we started doing linguistic discourse analysis after we gathered kind of some of the main themes, and this was where we got to the really interesting things. So we expected environmental discourses and environmental narratives to be the strongest because that's what we kind of associate with green hydrogen. Its focus of green hydrogen is that it's made from renewable energy rather than other forms such as blue or grey hydrogen, which are made from offsets of carbon burning and using fossil fuels. So we thought the environmental impacts were going to be strongest, but what we saw was that the economic discourse was the most prevalent. So coming through almost every single article, we saw economics appearing in headlines. So we often saw either direct economic terminology talking about economics or just economically kind of minded terminology such as invested and budgets and things like that. We saw this really strongly coming through both the headlines and opening paragraphs, which is where casual readers of news, especially people who aren't going to keep reading, if they're just going to skim through, this is the bit that's going to stick with them. So we immediately started to see green hydrogen being posed as more of an economic thing rather than an environmental thing. Now, this isn't negative. It just became negative a bit when we saw that a lot of these articles, often the skeptical and critical ones, posed this as costing the average New Zealander. Either through direct framing or by implication, they said that this was going to have a cost for us as an average New Zealander rather than just being, an expensive thing to bring into the country. And in terms of talking about what it's going to take to set it up, they framed it in a way where it's going to cost most people. So that is clearly going to drive people away from green hydrogen. So that's something to be aware of when we were looking at this, is that this narrative, while not entirely negative in terms of the economic system, is starting to kind of shift that way. And we often saw exportation being brought up. This was often tacked on. It was removed from other narratives and kind of just stuck on as a non-integral part of the discourse, often by the supportive articles saying, it's okay, we know that it's going to be expensive, but we can export it. Now, on the surface, this is quite good. It's like, okay, awesome, we've got this new export thing. We saw a lot of the articles compared it to, like New Zealand's exportation of meat and things like that. It was going to be a really big thing. But the issue was a lot of these arguments were disconnected. They weren't supported. They didn't emphasize the fact that this is incredibly hard to do, and there actually isn't an export market for it right now. There's no market for green hydrogen. We don't know that it's going to sell well, and we don't necessarily know that there's actually going to be people wanting it for the green credits. So although it appears a lot, it's kind of disconnected and doesn't give a good overall impression of green hydrogen. However, we didn't see, that wasn't all about it. We saw a lot of environmental discourse, but we saw it almost through its absence. So just every article talked about it. Every article mentioned it. The articles that said it was not going to have an environmental impact were marked. Every other article just assumed, they implied, they took it for granted that green hydrogen was going to have an environmental impact. Positive or negative, it was just said that, oh yeah, green hydrogen is going to do something for the environment. So it was the unmarked form of discourse. If you saw an article that talked about green hydrogen, you knew that there was going to be an environmental impact in there. If it specifically stated there wasn't, that immediately started bringing up flags in terms of, clicks the reader on. We also saw green hydrogen being posed as a solution. Because there wasn't a big focus on green hydrogen as an environmental narrative, instead little strands within this became focused on. So we saw green hydrogen posed as a key, as the solution to climate change and as a fix for New Zealand's climate issues. And on the surface, a reader isn't necessarily going to be like, oh, awesome, this is going to solve climate change. But constant repeated messaging that this was going to fix New Zealand's climate solution is going to have an impact. If that's all we're seeing about green hydrogen, is that it's a new technology that's going to come and fix our ability to reach emission goals, that's what's going to become the prevalent form of discourse. We also saw that it essentially hijacked the group of environmentally minded Kiwis. It was essentially, there was a lot in here, but essentially by joining on to the values and the assumed status of this group, green hydrogen in a lot of these articles was posed as, if you support the environment, you support green hydrogen. If you don't like green hydrogen, you do hate the environment and you're a monster. And of course, it wasn't said so clearly. There was no article that said, if you hate green hydrogen, you're a monster. but it came through in almost all of the articles that it was assuming the same values, it was using strong use of deictic we and us, and assuming a sense of community with environmentally minded New Zealanders. So this is immediately going to be essentially attempting to take the same form as something like solar panels or wind turbines. And we also sort of pitched against electrification. A lot of the articles were like, yes, we can use the two in tandem, and that is where it's most likely going. But we did see some strong focus in the articles of the two against each other, which, while not necessarily true, or, and that's not necessarily how it's going to be implemented if it is, this is probably the dominant form of narrative we see about it in relation to electrification. But it was all focused on the future. Everything about green hydrogen was future focused. We see this with climate technology all the time. It's focused on the future. We're making a better future. But green hydrogen was really seeped in it. English, we think of movement into the future as movement forward. Not all languages do this. A lot of languages do it differently. So when we think of movement into the future, we immediately think of movement forward. And in English, forward movement has positive connotations. We're moving forward. We're not sinking back. You immediately think of something moving forward and you think of it as a good thing. You think of it as a positive light. And green hydrogen was really strongly seeped in this kind of terminology. Everything we saw was green hydrogen is moving forward. It's a path to the future. It's us taking the next step. Every article, almost, even the critical and the negative ones, were seeped in this terminology. And it was seen as certain. It was green hydrogen's coming. It isn't green hydrogen's a possibility, it might be here. It's green hydrogen is coming, but there isn't really anything you can do about it. Which, that's the narrative that's coming through. But when you pair that with the economic side of things, it makes it seem like green hydrogen's coming. It's an industry-specific thing, but it is going to start to cost us, which is probably where we start to see a bit of a slant towards the negative side of things. We always see a sense of urgency with environmental things. You have to act now or nothing's going to change. We have to get this pushed in. We have to see this through. We have to put it in now so that it will actually have an impact. But for green hydrogen, largely because it's so new and largely because there's so little technical information available out for it, at least technical information that's easily accessible in layman's terms, the sense of urgency makes it seem as if it's being rushed out. A lot of the critical and the skeptical articles leap onto this, and you see a strong prevailing narrative that this urgency is essentially the government rushing it out. It's companies attempting to rush in something that's half-baked and not fully thought through. So we saw a lot of common critiques. We were really interested in this rather than drawing direct conclusions. We made some and just finding what was there. So what is the public going to see? What are they interested in? What do companies need to communicate to the public, and what do we need to look at addressing in order to foster a better relationship between the public and the scientists on this debate? And so there was a bit of focus on the dangers, both the physical ones and environmental dangers of leakage and things like that. But we saw a lot of critique about its energy inefficiency compared to electrification, because it takes a lot of energy to make the hydrogen, and not all of that energy comes back out again when you use the hydrogen as fuel. And there was also a lot of mistrust in the politics and the companies that were actually implementing it. People didn't think that this was okay. There was a lot of things that happened with the mining companies and the energy companies that are involved in it, where their controversies got reflected onto green hydrogen. So we didn't end up with any specific conclusions because that's not what we were aiming for here. But this list of common critiques was kind of one of the main takeaways that we wanted to give to people when we came out of this report. Well, we had a lot of conclusions and a lot of suggestions for what people can do, what scientists can do talking to the media, and what companies can do when they're talking to their press teams and creating positive engagement. These were kind of the focuses. What does the public want to know, and what are the dominant themes we're currently seeing in the media? And so that's kind of the main thing we came up with out of this.
Thanks, Caelum. So up next, we've got Brent, who's going to talk about alternative proteins.
We go. Sorry. Yeah, that's the start.
I'll just get it sharing on Zoom. think it should work out.
Kia ora, everyone. I'd like to start by thanking everyone for being here and for the opportunity to be a student intern for the summer. It's been a really rewarding process. I've learned a ton. So I thought I would start by saying thank you because I'll probably end up forgetting. So ko Brent Paehua takonua, mo te kotioho, ko Ngāti Mani o Potua Toko Iwi. I'm Brent, I'm from Dunedin, and I'm a sociology major here with hopefully a semester to go before I finish my bachelor's. I'm a fantastic blank canvas for this. I knew nothing before this studentship. So as a 135 kilo former powerlifter, coming into this was a little bit of a feeling like maybe I could feel a wee bit guilty about the mass genocide of chicken that I've eaten. So I've learned a lot, it's opened my eyes a lot, and I'll share with you some of my experiences towards the end in terms of some changes I've made, albeit maybe I need to make more. I'd like to just acknowledge as well that this project, this studentship started with another person, Kaila, but we lost her to the Department of Conservation probably about 5 weeks into it. So it's been me from then, but Brooke did a lot of work on the side of the facts and figures that you'll see through here. She comes from a geography background, so she did a lot around things like the land usage side of stuff, whereas I did a lot more around the engagement with Māori. To talk about the engagement with Māori in this subject, you actually have to learn a bit about alternative proteins first, as I've learned, and it seems to be one of the things that we've found has been a really a big barrier to speaking to Māori about it, is literally that not just Māori, but a lot of people just don't know about it. So this is what I'll run over. This picture here is actually a really cool one because this is from a company that's based in Dunedin, over in Whaka Valley. They've sort of introduced some products there, the something meat company corporation. Sorry, I can't actually remember that. Terrible. So this is what we have been going through, and a bit different for me. I was part of a project that was already happening. So we jumped in, me and Brooke, we jumped in around about the time that there was the first sort of workshopping where we sort of come together. So a little bit different, not something that we've created from start to finish, something that's still ongoing at the moment. The second question is the main one that we've been addressing during the project. What are the implications of a shift of food production for Māori producers' concerns, and what does this, how does this fit into Te Ao Māori? Part of this, what we've been doing is actually creating a brochure. So it's something that can go out to organisations and to communities to basically say, this is why you should start looking at investing in alternative proteins. So the presentation I'm doing for you, if you imagine, is actually been condensed down into a brochure that can literally go out to people to assist with sort of making some decisions around investing. This is a research process, as I know, led by 3 wise men up in Christchurch. John Reed's my main contact through Simon Barber and off Campbell here. He is the lead on the Te Ao Māori side of the project. So we were involved in the first workshop, October 22, and then we've worked through the studentship, come back together in January to sort of see what has happened, where they've gone out and they've interviewed stakeholders, people who are in agriculture, people who are involved in alternative proteins, collated some responses, got back together in January, and now the research is ongoing with another round of interviews to come up. So I just thought I'd touch on some other research that's happening. There's heaps, but this is perhaps just some really good snapshots of what's happening around New Zealand. So Massey University have got a $3 million funded set of research that's going into investigating why people aren't, or why people are using alternative proteins. Huge portion of that is a sort of a holistic health type thing, but a lot of it's around sensory appeal, so how they taste, how they feel in your mouth, those sorts of things. Leaf foods, another one that's received quite a large sum of funding, and their whole thing is about proteins in leaves. Production of robusca, which is this powder here on the left side. Not something unheard of. There's vegetable proteins and things like that, whey proteins that are vegetable based, but robusca over here is what they're actually focused on. And the last one is the Tito Ihu Indigenous Materials, which is really interesting. It's being funded by Ag Research with the Wakatū Corporation, and basically they're looking into things that already exist, but have long been forgotten. Things like multi-traditional fermentation practices, and also looking at things like microbes that have been used in indigenous native plants, things that we might have lost a lot of by the sort of mass clearing for agriculture. So what are emerging alternatives/future proteins? Because there's a large number of them, or large number of labels applied to them. And essentially they're the bottom three here. So plant-based proteins we all know because you've probably seen them in the supermarket, but this precision fermentation, cultivated protein or cellular protein processes, again, total foreign concept to me when I first started this. So these are the ones that are really being looked at as sort of the alternative proteins in terms of moving forward in a world potentially moving away from agriculture. So the first one, I have done roughly 2 months on this. So total expert now. Precision fermentation, taking a cell from an animal, putting it in a bioreactor, mixing it with some water, sugar, nutrients, or a yeast formula. This then multiplies, and this creates a protein that can then be added to products. In this particular version here, which is supplied fortunately for me by Rob Vernon, it's ice cream up the top there. So it's a precision fermented version of proteins that have been created into ice cream. Everyone knows what that is now. Cultivated proteins is meat. It's made using a cellular method, but what is important to note is that it actually creates not just meat, but fats, connective tissues, muscles, those sorts of things. It's a non-genetically modified product at the end. The cellular method, similar, is a cell taken from a cow, mixed with a serum. The serum is things like salt, vitamins, those types of things, and a bioreactor that has a scaffold in it. Once the cell is entered into the bioreactor, it attaches to this scaffold. It's fed, it grows, and it essentially can be harvested into what you can see at the bottom there, which is this alternative meat. If we go back, that's exactly what we've got here packaged. Precision fermentation, or cellular method of making milk, is another one. It's just where the cell is taken from the mammary gland of an animal, goes through the same process, but it secretes a protein, and that's often milk or dairy products that have been turned into things like cheese and yogurt. So just getting an understanding of the dairy industry, according to the Ministry of Primary Industries, sort of a $19 billion dairy industry in Aotearoa, responsible for around about 5% of national GDP, 23% of total export. Can understand why it's so important to New Zealand, but also there's like a whole flip side to that, and that is that, Replanet put out the Reboot Manifesto that essentially says that agriculture is the biggest contributor to biodiversity loss. So we're losing a lot of things just for agriculture alone. New Zealand has around about 6 million cows, 11,000 herds. Dairy cattle have the highest environmental impact, followed by beef cattle. Precision fermentation is the thing that's really challenging that. So this is the one where Daisy Lab, that's here, or the Digital Agro Environmental and Intelligence System with a Y and lab added at the end, SMART. They're a startup in New Zealand that actually are doing a lot of research and development for our New Zealand market in terms of replacing casein and whey-based products. There are other organisations around the world, but Daisy are sort of leading things in New Zealand. Perfect Day down here are a great example of a company that have already gone through that process and are now producing products like cheeses, milk, and they've entered into huge markets like India and America and the United States, and are actually starting to sell these products. So there is a lot of progress happening in the space. This is just a really great example for New Zealand in terms of the effect our agriculture industry has methane-wise. If you just have a look at everything that's combined, you would perhaps stereotypically think that because we ship everything in trucks across the country, that it would have this huge impact, but it's nothing compared to the agriculture that New Zealand relies on, but is obviously the thing that is really harmful to our environment. So here's some facts for you. So the Good Food Institute also meat consumption globally is the highest it's ever been. Meat production is projected to double by 2050. And obviously, if you just consider the amount of cows we have in New Zealand alone, then obviously this has a humongous global impact. Livestock farming now covers 28% of the Earth's surface on its own, which is more than all the Earth's forests combined. If all the world's protein was created by precision fermentation, then it would be feasible to be done in an area no greater than Greater London. So that would literally feed the whole world for protein. And it's not impossible, and we'll see why soon. Emissions from livestock farming account for at least 16.5% of the planet's greenhouse gases. Over half of New Zealand's fertile land is now farmland. New Zealand is now the world's 8th largest dairy producer and the biggest dairy exporter, thinking about things like milk protein, milk powders and things like that. And between 1990 and 2020, gross emissions increased by 21%. This is mostly due to increased methane from the growth of the cattle, dairy cattle population, and dairy cattle numbers have increased 82% during that same period of time from 3.4 million to 6.3. This all doesn't sound so alarming, but this is supposed to be a hard-hitting fact of being like, this is actually why changes need to be made now. So just so that you can understand that things are happening in this space, Coliseo, they've just opened up the first industrial scale alternative protein facility in China. 20,000 tonnes of protein per year, with the idea that this will rapidly expand to about 80,000. This is one facility, you're seeing it in that picture. It's no more than that. So it's not fields and fields of agricultural land, it's that facility. Linea, this is a facility that they're about to create. It's predicted that they'll be able to produce 6 million pounds of seafood products. This is all by precision ferment. No, this is by cultivated protein, cellular protein. Linea is another big brand that have been investing a lot of research and development into precision fermented milk and dairy products. They're on the verge of opening, they're on the verge of starting to build a facility in Denmark, which will have the ability to produce the same amount of milk as 50,000 dairy cows. Now, I didn't do this, but just when I was speaking to Angus before, I could have really gone through and tried to figure out exactly how much that would impact our 6 million cows, but perhaps I'll address that at some other time. And Aleph Farms, based in Israel, sort of leading a lot of things in terms of cultivated protein. On the left here is a ribeye steak that they've been able to make. It looks strange, I'll admit, but once it's cooked, it doesn't look much different. Now, this process here is done by 3D printing. The cultivated proteins that have been harvested from the scaffolding process and then 3D printed. But as you'll see, it's meat, fat, muscle tissue. It's still the exact same meat you would get from cattle, from a cow. Also, just a tidbit, Leonardo DiCaprio sits on the board. I learned that last night. So he's an investor of theirs, and he sits on the board now. And based in Israel, because Israel is the most convinced population of vegans. So now that you're all as expert as I am on all of that stuff, how do we actually bring this back around full scale and sort of involve or engage Māori? So the Ministry of Primary Industries uses this sort of fourfold method of interacting with Māori, and it's the same thing that Emerging Proteins is doing. So it's making sure that it's looking at community and social benefits, environmental, cultural, and economic benefits as well. And engagement with Māori, from what we've been able to look at, is also educating. So bringing people around the table and actually educating them in terms of what this is. And it's really important to do that, because in the past, when there have been large changes like this, perhaps it might be a situation where Indigenous people, Māori, might be the last people to know. It's an opportunity of sharing an understanding of the potential benefits and disruptions, because there are going to be, if we were to mass change, there would be disruptions. And access, so making investment accessible, but making sure that all the information is accessible and that it's a shared thing across Aotearoa. So in terms of the cultural benefits, Te Ao Māoritanga naturally aligns with emerging proteins. It's but that's largely because there's a kaitiaki factor. It's a traditional concept in which bonds iwi and hapu with whenua awa ngāhere moana ho of Aotearoa. When we say kaitiaki, I'm obviously conscious that it's not just Māori's responsibility to have that relationship with our land, but it is certainly one of those concepts that Māori hold dear. So to move into a space where we're not using so much agriculture is obviously to honour this much more. Kaitiaki is obviously a guardian, a steward, a protector and a preserver of Aotearoa. And again, I say it's not just the Māori responsibility or a sort of a low-hanging fruit to say Māori have to be kaitiaki, everyone has to do that. But when we're talking about a cultural view of what emerging proteins could be, this is certainly a very important one. A reduction, as I say, a reduction of an agricultural harm is an act of kaitiakitanga. Matarangi Māori also has the ability to enhance this process because in most situations where Māori have had to be innovative, they've thrived. So at the moment we have a Māori economy that is largely based off farming, and that is obviously by understanding our whenua and understanding how to keep the most from it, but also in terms of sharing our knowledge around things like former fermentation practices that Māori have had, and also things like making traditional Māori cuisine accessible to all. Now, we say traditional Māori cuisine, and a bit of a tongue-in-cheek conversation that myself and Simon Barbara have had around how would alternative proteins hold up to hangi, boiler, these types of things. But of course, there's always an ability to adapt these things. Māori cuisine at this point in time is not a wide-ranged thing. Most people won't have hangi or boiler often, but in terms of being able to have these things brought to the fore and be accessible, then perhaps it's the kind of thing that we can share with the rest of the world. So there is a real cultural benefit. Also here, we'll talk about this a little bit more, but some food security through emerging protein. We understand how much we can produce, unlike with agriculture and the even growing need of more land and so on. It would increase the potentials for community amongst Māori and other people also. So some environmental benefits. It's not to say that we don't recognise the impact on Māori landowners and employers, because that is really important. But it's a reduction in land use, obviously an opportunity for other things. And one of those big things is rewilding. So we lose a lot of resource, or Māori people have lost a lot of resource by having things like native bush, native forest taken away. There's traditional Māori foods that have now not available en masse, people, things like that grow in forests. Rewilding would also give us an opportunity to look into things that are available to repurpose for like food. So Māori have long been innovative in those areas, as I say. An introduction of agriculture to this present day sort of includes growing edible plants and discovering new uses for native plants, medicines, ointments, these types of things. So there's an opportunity there were there to be rewilding to actually look into those things as well. And some regrowth of traditional practices of fermentation, as I've said, and discovering sort of those preservation tactics, preservation traditions might actually, we may actually find some modern applications for those as well. So this is the area that probably I am most interested in, and that is largely in relation to the fact that there's a real issue with food insecurity amongst Māori. Māori are overrepresented in many sociological aspects, but in many, sociological aspects of inequality, but food scarcity is a real problem. So as of 2015, 1 in 5 Māori children have experienced food insecurity, and in 2015, roughly 68,000 Māori people lived in insecurity. That number has decreased. There is more now in terms of people who are actually providing food, so there's more food banks and things, but that just says that the need's just as high, or if not higher. So food scarcity, it leads to some social erosion for Māori people, and Māori people aren't the only people who feel the effects of this. Pacific Island community are the same, but a lack of self-determination comes from social erosion. I'm not able to do all of this stuff for myself. I'm not able to obtain the food that my family needs. I have to ask for it. It's embarrassing. We can see where that goes. And for Māori, in a traditional sense, community really surrounded food. And you can see that now, even in your stereotypical views of like coming together on marae and what that looks like. But that's, food insecurity reduces that idea of community as well. So emerging proteins and investment means that there is the ability to gain some food security. It takes a while to get there, but there is a light at the end of that tunnel that is food security, and it can be tailored to the needs of Māori or to New Zealand Aotearoa as a whole. A production of alternative proteins increases food access, and investment for Māori, or by Māori, for Māori, and for the rest of Aotearoa is an act of tino ranga tiratanga, sort of ultimate self-determination, which flows over into the economic benefits. Tino ranga tiratanga and Māori agribusiness investment in the emerging proteins allows Māori to be involved in the planning, creation, production, and distribution of alternative proteins. This provides an opportunity for Māori to champion the area, not just for Māori, but for all of Aotearoa. The economic opportunity and potential for the future is vast. Investment in the emerging protein sector is growing at a rapid rate. At one point in time, it's about $5 million. And then about 11 years passes up until 2021, and now it's around about, as of 2021, it's around about $5 billion. So it's growing rapidly. And it's the sort of thing that when we're approaching Māori organisations want to lead with, because obviously you don't want to be left behind. But in this circumstance now, Māori are in a position where they're financially able to invest in the area. Whereas in previous food revolutions or other things that we've gone through, Māori might not have had that economy to be able to do so. Land and Water estimates that Māori own about $13 billion worth of primary sector assets. And this creates around about 870 million worth of exports, predominantly through foods and fibres. And according to Dairy Companies Association New Zealand, Māori own roughly around 10% of the dairy farms in Aotearoa. So this is the part where I say, it's not to say that we don't understand that there will be some financial ramifications, but you're in a position where you do have money to be able to make these types of investments for the betterment of Māori and for the rest of Aotearoa. So Māori can capitalise on the potential investments in emerging proteins. These financial benefits can be used to secure a future for the success of Māori communities and help create healthy living environments for all of Aotearoa. This last slide, I just wanted to sort of share some of my thoughts and conclusions. There's a picture of my dad, who was the ultimate skeptic. 1950s, Tawera Nui raised Māori father, and engaging in conversations with him has been really beneficial for me. We've been able to talk through a lot of different things that without this subject and without this opportunity, we wouldn't have discussed. He is a person who has experienced Māori fermentation firsthand. He came from a place that had no power when he was a child, and they had to put sacks of corn into the local swamp to ferment and to preserve for winter, etc. He hated it. It stunk really, really bad. But it is something that he had to do. In the progress of his life, he's gone from being the person who would go hit Pūhau straight after school, milk your one cow that produced the milk for a 10-person family, to an urbanised Māori has moved from the middle of the North Island away from his whenua to down here to absolutely not hunting or gathering any of his food whatsoever. So to talk about these types of things took him from being a skeptic to very slightly less of a skeptic, and we ended up having a conversation that ended with, I would try it if it tastes exactly the same and it feels exactly the same in my mouth. So he's a really great resource of sort of saying, but he understands the social implications for Māori and why they need to be proactive about being involved and investing in the area as well. So it's good to get his sort of take. I did want to put in, I know that in this presentation, it doesn't really talk a lot about the negative sides or the potential naysayers, but there's definitely those there. It doesn't take too much of a Google search to find learned people, adjunct professors who suggest that there's no evidence that this is going to be as great as it is. we don't need to do any of it. There isn't any transparency. There's no need for change. New Zealand champions things like pasture control. We're really good to our animals, all of these sorts of things. So there is plenty of naysayers there. And if there's one thing that we can learn from our past, it's the transition of woolens to synthetic fibres. New Zealand was a country that raised sheep for wool, for clothes, and now we all just use synthetic fibres and no wool. So it is an idea of something that existed and has had to change. And for me, the personal impact is, it makes it a bit silly, but like little things like almond milk now, not regular milk. Trying a vegetable burger, trying to reduce the amount of red meat that I eat, understanding a little bit more about my nutrition, just to try and actually do at least a few % of my part in terms of reducing some of those things that are so harmful to Aotearoa. So just want to thank you for your time again. That's me.
So, thanks very much, Brent. Up next, we have Grace. I'll put you onto the screen so everyone here can see.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can. That's perfect. So if you want to start sharing your screen, and I'll hand over to you.
Thank you. Sorry, give me 2 seconds to get this sorted. Sharing screen. Okay. Cool. Oh, sorry. I'm not the best with this. All right, here we go. Cool, so kia ora everybody. I'm Grace Petersen. I've finished my undergrad degree in human nutrition and going on to do my master's this year in advanced nutrition practice. Before I started this internship or summer studentship, I had worked a bit in the horticulture sector back at home in Hawke's Bay. I really noticed the waste from the apple industry and just how now there's a few things being done with it, but just the extra wasted produce. It's a really exciting opportunity to turn this into a product that we could benefit from, especially the growers, and just increase their return in pocket. So firstly, food loss and waste is a huge issue, with more than 1/3 of the world's food being thrown away. Wasting food has many environmental, social, and economic impacts. New Zealand has very little information on what food waste in the primary production sector currently looks like, which is why projects such as my own are taking place. Over the summer, I've been working with Onions New Zealand to look at waste in the onion growing industry. Onions New Zealand are an organisation who represent 85 commercial onion growers and 18 export members. Their vision is to facilitate sustainable growth and profitability of onion growers and exporters. To assist with this vision, Onions New Zealand approached food waste innovation at Otago to further grow in this area. Onions are grown in fields all over New Zealand and are exported to 45 countries worldwide. Climate and weather uncertainty coupled with insect damage leads to high volumes of this produce being wasted. Although this isn't under the control of the growers themselves, we can work together in order to find a use for the wasted produce from these first two problems. Also being labelled as low priority in comparison to other issues that the growers are facing, as well as a lack of exploration and pre-competitive cooperation, has meant that there has been hesitation to find a solution to the problem at hand. Combining the findings and enthusiasm of the growers in order to increase the resilience of the sector will be key in finding a solution to the problem. This will mean utilising the volumes of waste to make a viable added value product, which will in turn increase and diversify income streams through potential collaboration with other horticulture sectors. Adding value to products from the waste produced on farm is an area which should see growth from the onion growing industry. Options for this include biorefinery for powders. Many meals, snacks, and sauces require onion as one of the key flavour ingredients, and some consumers are now switching the whole onion out for dried powder alternative. This is an opportunity for our onion industry, as onion powder includes the bulb, but can also include dehydrated onion skins, leaves, and roots. Onion juice is another solution that the industry could look at for waste utilization. Thanks to the high amounts of vitamins, minerals, and antioxidants such as vitamin C and quercetin, onion juice has shown to be beneficial in health aspects such as immunity function and to fight off inflammation within the body. Other options include a quercetin-rich extract derived from onion waste, which is known for its many health benefits such as reducing the risk of some cancers and supporting sports recovery and performance. The project that I have been working on with Onions New Zealand is called Project 9 Waste Stream with Humble to Hero. The Humble to Hero program is a 6-year program aimed to transform the New Zealand onion growing industry from humble to hero. Onions New Zealand and the Ministry for Primary Industries, Sustainable Food and Fibre Futures will jointly invest $6 million into the program. The program consists of 10 projects across the value chain, which will deliver research to be transformational for the industry. My project has consisted of the development of the questionnaire, which saw research into the area and meetings with the Waste Stream Working Group and exporters to review. Once finalised, the questionnaire was used for a 10-minute phone call with 22 growers. Analysis of the data is the stage that I'm currently up to. So we'll just discuss the current trends that I'm seeing. So from the 22 growers that have been interviewed so far, 13 are located in the North Island and 9 in the South Island. The current trend lines have shown growers located in the North Island produce less waste as the tonnage is increased, whereas in the South Island, we're seeing the opposite trend where if they are, more waste is equating from smaller growers. When asked what they define their waste as, most growers stated that it was unsaleable, unmarketable, rotten, or damaged. This meant that some growers concluded that their waste was inedible, but some growers also stated that some of this waste is still edible and could be used for human consumption. The majority of the growers use their waste as stock feed, but 4 stated that they compost their waste. One grower said one grower said that their waste is used for further processing and is sent to a peeler. When asked if they would be interested in a viable waste project in their region, 21 of the growers said yes, and 1 grower said that they would not be interested. So in summary, data is still yet to be obtained from the 3 growers that are being interviewed, hopefully this week. I'm still in the process of finishing off the report, so conclusions and recommendations will be made in response to the updated data obtained from this research and will be presented to the working group. But yeah, I just wanted to finish off by saying thank you to my supervisors, Trixie and Miranda. I've definitely learned a lot, as I'm sure everyone has, in having a summer of using your brain and just learning a lot more. I'm really looking forward to see where this work will take Onions New Zealand, and hopefully a viable value-added product will be a result of this. So thank you for listening, and get in touch if you have any questions.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Greg. So I think we've got one more. Kate, you're here. Do you have your presentation on the step? If you join the Zoom, you can share over there. Just while Kate's joining the Zoom, just remind everybody that this is our last presentation of the day. So thank you for all of you who have come in for bits and bobs or have been here the whole day. I've been here the whole day and it's been amazing to see the breadth of topics that the students have covered, to see the depth that they've gone into, to see the insights that they've been able to share. Remind everybody that there is the Pūhau Anatera journal, which is about to open for submissions. So that'll be a really awesome way for people at the early stages of being a researcher to experience the publication process. And we will have a panel with the 5 speakers who've presented in this last session once Kate is done. And so get thinking of your questions now. We've talked about the cultural impacts of climate change, green hydrogen, a couple of different topics about food, and we'll see where Kate takes us now. But yeah, lots of interesting topics, so get those questions going, and I'll hand it over to Kate.
Cool, thank you everyone, and this is a slightly spontaneous joining. I had a bit of an accident yesterday, but I couldn't hold myself back from coming along today. So yeah, I just want to share what I've been doing with my supervisor, Mick Abbott, who is largely based over at the Polytech, so you might not have seen him around, but we've been doing some really interesting research together on Te Araroa. And just out of interest, how many of you have heard of Te Araroa? Oh, cool. So as I will explain, it is a collection of landscapes, is one way to think of it. So Te Araroa is, as I'll explain soon, a walking trail through New Zealand. But one way to think of it is one kind of big landscape in itself, a place that people journey through. So something that I did to kind of prime myself for this research was to think about what is a landscape. And there are several people who have done some really great thinking on this. I've read some good books by someone called Tim Ingold, and also some co-authored by Mick Abbott, Jacinta Brew, and Janet Stevenson. So one way to think of it is it's actually something that not only we can shape, but also shapes us as we walk through it. So there's actually a two-way interaction going on there. And that we're also part of it. The landscape is a living being and contains many living beings, and we are one of them. And finally, it comes about through the stories we tell. So it's not kind of rigid and inert, but it's actually always being constructed. So back to Te Araroa. This is a map of the trail. It goes all the way, typically starting from the north, so from Cape Reinga to Bluff. And yeah, it really does encompass a variety of landscapes. There's farmland sections, road sections, but also some really backcountry, rugged New Zealand alpine sections and all of that. And it was opened in 2011, so it's in its relative infancy. There's some trails like this around the world, particularly the US, but this one is notably young, and therefore, again, if we think of landscape, still in that stage of it's still coming into being, it's still being shaped in its distinctive character, which opens an opportunity to influence how that kind of character, what kind of experience it's becoming for people. So this project was to look at a variety of walkers' accounts. So I looked at 20 also publicly available books, blogs, videos from quite a variety of ethnicities and ages and backgrounds. And from those to kind of interview the landscape through the eyes of those walkers. And a big output of this project will be a series of 6 annotated maps of the trail, and don't expect you to read all of that, but that's an example of, so putting together in total about 75 descriptions of places or moments as people walk along the trail. However, the next step, or alongside that, I was thinking about how is the trail experience that people are describing shaped by their own attitude and actions as they walk, but also by the landscape itself, so encounters with the landscape. So to start with the walker, yeah, again, I was asking the question of how much of the trail experience that they have is actually predetermined by things separate to the landscape. So all these like expectations, motivations, perceptions, and internal distractions that they walk with. So expectations, this can vary a lot depending on what kind of, say, tramping people have done before. There's quite a distinction between some people who are maybe used to walking around England or certain parts of the world that are a bit different to New Zealand, which is typically quite rugged, muddy. There's quite dangerous sometimes river crossings or alpine traverses. It's a photo of, yeah, the mud that people talk about a lot. And so this really shapes what people go in, not just anticipating, but also desiring from their walk. They might expect a certain level of beauty, comfort, track conditions, and when it doesn't meet those, then they might kind of struggle to see beyond that and just think of the landscape as, is it ticking these boxes of allowing me to walk through nicely? Something else is their trail why, or their big motivation for why they're walking Te Araroa, the TA. And it's not binary, but I kind of thought about 2 different ways that you can walk it. And one which is quite common, and I think everyone has to some degree if they're doing this, is wanting to achieve walking the trail. Interesting though, this really cultivates a sense of you're walking through the landscape. And I contrast that on the right with walking into the landscape and kind of being open to encounter. So when you're focused on achievement, you're probably rushing through a bit more and focusing on the number of kilometers you've covered, and also weighing up the trail based on how well it allows you to move through at pace, reducing it to those technical qualities, the track conditions of how easy it is to walk through. And landscape then can become just kind of the backdrop to your own personal journey and become something that is quite inert and not really something you interact with. Contrast is something I've just called the open mindset. And this could be people who are maybe setting off on Te Araroa, not simply to finish it, but maybe they're wanting to have a life reset or heal from some trauma or explore more of this country. And that often ends up meaning they take time a bit more to notice and be attentive to their surroundings, and also be a bit more adaptable and accept when the trail is different to what they're what they're expecting. So receiving it for what it is, and maybe that means sometimes stopping if the weather's not appropriate, and instead of trying to rush through, dwelling in a place for a bit longer and seeing what it's got, what kind of species are there. And the kind of sense that emerges from that mindset is that the land is a living being and that you are part of it. You get a sense more of those connections. Perceptions, this is an interesting one. I think humans often make sense of things that are different to us by anthropomorphizing or imagining, kind of putting human characteristics onto supposedly inanimate objects, or in this case, it's more that grey area of what about trees or mountains, rivers. And when they do that, it can really go either way. They might see the landscape as something that's hostile and this kind of adversarial battle with the landscape, but also they might see it as really friendly and opening. One example is, this is a picture from the Taradua Ranges near Wellington. It's called the Goblin Forest, this type of forest. And for some, they described it as a place that's really kind of foreboding and just uncomfortable, and they felt quite threatened almost by it. And others described quite literally as giant green teddy bears. They thought this landscape was a place that was welcoming them, sheltering them from the elements, the wind and the rain. So that kind of shows the way that different perceptions can really alter the way you see a landscape. What can also differ is how you situate yourself in the landscape. So you may see yourself as an outsider and that you're entering this place, but you're just passing through because it's not a place where you belong. But another option is that you really do see yourself as a part of it, as another being in the landscape. And something I quite enjoyed was looking at the accounts of mother and daughter Victoria and Emily, called Adventures with Emily. Emily was, I think, 7, 8 years old when they finished walking this. And the insight into a child's mind and the way they observe these places is really quite enjoyable to read. And often she would see herself as, say, a river nymph or a stone nymph, depending on where they were. And I thought that was capturing the way that you can see yourself as part of this kind of collective or community of beings. Internal distractions are something that happens to the human brain, and there are definitely times for everyone, even the most lively and slow-paced, open person. Sometimes it's just hard, and the trail gets a bit tiresome. That can be things like physical discomfort, and also maybe preoccupations with unprocessed thoughts from your past. However, I looked at different ways that people dealt with this or approached it, and noted that there were some things that helped. If you were, up to the task a bit more, then if you've done training, you probably won't get so bothered by pain, discomfort, say blisters, and also the bugbear of fear. If you have a kind of more confidence, say with river crossings, then that won't be taking over your mind so much. Finding walking practices that work for you, so going at a pace and having kind of bursts in the day that keep you feeling good about the trail, and equally taking rest days. And then on the flip side, ways to focus more on the landscape. I found that when people did go at a slower pace, obviously they wouldn't achieve the trail quite so quickly, but they would be able to enjoy the experience a lot more and give them space just to be if they needed to. Equally, if they were able to do some creative process that made them more attentive to what they were observing, or maybe literally identifying the species that they could see, that would also make them more attuned to the landscape. And people noted that when they were following that red line on the GPS, they ended up having quite narrow vision and not being so open, so avoiding that. So that was the walker, but what about the landscape? The question now is, to what degree does the landscape actually break through that kind of subjective lens that people walk with and interject? So I noticed that some landscapes, again, it's not binary, but some more than others, manage to really provoke encounter. So I called these strong landscapes, and the kind of words that came up that should really all be in quotation marks were landscapes that are lush, like forest that has so many things to look at, raw landscapes, ones that feel quite untouched and visceral, ones where there's a strong sense of the past, or ones where you get a strong spatial sense of really wide open vistas. Also ones that are conforming to this quite well known, I'm sure you've heard of it, like pure, 100% pure NZ, or just our idea of what a beautiful landscape is. They tend to provoke encounter a lot more. And also ones that, yeah, make you feel a certain way, maybe exhausted. And the result of that is, yeah, quite in your face, unavoidable encounters. You might feel quite small and humbled, and have few distractions, but this quite, I guess, immersion in the landscape. And that photo is from the Waio Pass around the Nelson Lakes area. That's an example of pretty much everyone, even if they were very just focused on that red line and number of kilometers, they were awed by that landscape, and it really managed to get them to sense the presence and the living being, even if they didn't put those words to it. Also more subtle landscapes. So these were ones that were only noticed by people who were a bit more maybe slow-paced, attentive, and really looking for things. Often ones that we're used to having as a backdrop, landscapes that are quite familiar, which could be, yeah, I guess, the more civilized areas like farmland and roads. Also places where human marks are more obvious, and that's not necessarily heavily modified environments, but ones where you notice you're trampling on things a lot more. Could be swamps or really muddy bits of forest. Equally, just monotonous places like 90 Mile Beach is notorious for the same. So these, yeah, they might have the opposite effect. Rather than feeling small, you feel quite obtrusive. You really get that sense of trampling, and I think that feels a bit uncomfortable to people, and they don't like to think of the landscape as being a living being, and that's the case. Might also require a bit more knowledge of the landscape in order to have that connection. So this is a picture of the Red Hills area and the Richmond Ranges, top of the South Island. And that's a really unique mineral zone, actually. And I found it quite fascinating to learn about. And I think you'd get a quite different sense of that landscape if you knew about how it's come into being compared to if you were just walking through and seeing things being quite barren. So all of this comes down to the idea of landscape as a living being, which is of course something that has been long recognised in Te Ao Māori in New Zealand, with the idea of, as I mentioned at the bottom there, legal personhood. It's now being encoded a bit more in how we actually manage these places. And yeah, so what I noticed is that for all of these landscape encounters, they cause people to situate themselves quite well in that landscape, recognising their place in it both spatially and temporally, so over time, and noticing that yes, they may be small and insignificant in that big picture, but they are also connected and part of it. And a really key point is that when you get a sense of landscape as a living being, you are in a bit more reverence of that place. You respect it a lot more, and that then prompts an ethic of kaitiakitanga, of caring for that place. And this is a photo of the Whanganui River, which, as many may know, has been granted legal personhood, which really does affect how it's managed. So to wrap up, when I was looking at these accounts, for Te Araroa walkers, there is a sense of the landscape's presence, but it's definitely not universal and not evenly spread across the trail. Some landscapes are honoured with this more than others, and some walkers are also more attuned than others. And I looked at why that might be. A lot does depend on how walkers approach the trail, but the positive thing is that can be shifted. So my final slide is, what are the applications of these findings? This image is potential mock-up of the kind of annotated maps that we're hoping to make. And what we want to do is reflect the idea that all of these landscapes have the potential to be encountered as living beings through, and we can encourage that if we tell a story about the trail that allows people to see it that way and enter it in that way. So we're wanting to change it from a bit of an ordeal that you push through and get the non-existent medal at the end to an encounter where people go in prepared to greet the landscape and also to encounter it. And the ultimate goal is for all of this to generate that ethic of kaitiakitanga. New Zealand, as the whole world does, needs restoration of its ecosystems, and equally people need, we always need to become more whole, restored people, and there's great potential, I think, for Te Araroa not simply to be something that people walk to achieve, but something where as they walk, both landscape and walker are being restored together. So thank you.
Thanks, Jack. I'll get you to stay there and grab a seat, and also invite Kaila, Brent, and Caelum to join them. And Grace, if you're still on there, yeah. Okay, going to have a brief panel to wrap up. So anybody want to kick us off with questions for any of the five who've spoken in that last session, online or in the room? Yep, away you go, Ray.
So several of you were describing quite challenging futures, whether it be about the impact of climate change or change in speed, communicated. I'm interested to see what connections there were as you were listening to each other's talks, similarities about how to start talking about the future and all those different aspects.
I noticed that emerging proteins is a component of pretty much everything that's spoken about today. So carbon emissions, greenhouse gases, it has an effect on virtually all of that. So there should be some sort of combined interest in sort of the preservation of New Zealand. So I think it's quite awesome having a space like this, because you get a lot of people to deal with very like-mindedness that are very conscious of this thing. But I found myself through the studentship having quite a few conversations with friends and family. They had no idea. They just don't know. So sort of being an agent of promoting it is a really good way of doing it.
Anyone else want to respond to that? I've got a question. So we had a couple of ones explicitly research questions around integration of Te Ao Paull, but I think it was sort of implicit in some of the other presentations as well. And Caelum specifically, I know that you also presented something similar at the Green Hydrogen Conference that Otago hosted. Yeah. And there was a real presence of mana whenua there. Yeah, was that something that came through in the articles that you read, but also if you have any reflections on maybe those other conversations that you've been around the last few weeks?
So it's not something that we looked at with our project. We did notice some things in terms of some of the ways that it was shaped. Like it was viewed through the more Māori-focused articles and things like that, but then we only found out of the like 70 something that I initially started with, there were only like 3 or 4 that really talked about how it would impact Te Ao Māori. And so what that meant for us was we could immediately see that there wasn't this kind of media presence around it in terms of how it was portrayed to Te Ao Māori and how the Te Ao Māori values were communicated in relation to it. So that was something that came through in the report, was the fact that what we didn't see was just as important as what we did see. Like articles that mentioned green hydrogen as an aside were just as important as ones that focused on it, because we got to see how it was viewed in the wider community. And so although something that I didn't look at, but we heard a lot looking at the green hydrogen conference, is looking at how the resources that actually go into making green hydrogen, how they're used, whether or not that is, that has an impact on how it's viewed for Māori. And so it's not something we approached in our project, but it is a really interesting factor in terms of green hydrogen, especially because for green hydrogen, it's used mainly fresh water goes into making it. You can do desalination and use salt water, but generally we're looking at fresh water, which is, has quite an importance in that area. So yeah, it's something we didn't look at personally, but is quite crucial in the sector.
There's a lady, I think, on the top right. She's putting her physical hand.
Oh, Te Pora, yeah.
Kia ora. Yes, I took it off. Kia ora. My first comment, please, was for Katie. I'd like to offer you, Katie, because particularly in your last 2 slides, I could see very much how the aim of that research project is about restoring the Māori of our landscape here in Aotearoa. I have a question for Ray. Absolutely fascinating what you were doing, Ray. As a vegetarian / mostly vegan, I think I'm talking to the right person. Looking at the fact that animal cells are combined in the manufacture of the protein, will there be any attempt to manufacture some that would actually be suitable for vegans and vegetarians?
I think that's aimed at me. Yeah. So they have to put on the labels that there are that they come from animals, but generally speaking, they are sort of like supposed to be, sort of vegan, vegetarian friendly, because they're not actually the cell's taken from the animal, but it's grown from that cell itself. So it's not meant to be that it's actually still an animal product. When they make things like Perfect Day, when they're making their ice creams through their precision fermentation process, they don't say that they're animal. I think they say that they're something like animal free, but it isn't to suggest that they're not coming from animals themselves. I think that's right.
But it depends, why you're vegan. Are you vegan for health reasons, or you're vegan for other reasons?
So I'm sorry if that came across as I'm not.
No.
But I understand.
You're not killing an animal
to
do this. You're just extracting enzyme.
Yeah, so there's some acknowledgement that it does come from an animal, but it is not a harmful process to an animal.
Because the ones where they're basically taking DNA sequences to create dairy protein, putting that into the yeast, that then sits in the biofermenter, you're well one step even further removed from that.
And my understanding is, sorry, just to add, my understanding is the cell that is removed can be reused. So it's not every time a product is being made, you have to go back to the cow and take a cell.
But I must say, the main target for these products is not vegans. It's the whole cheap world market for industrial products.
Oh, good. That answered my question. Thank you.
I always have a question. For 2 gentlemen, because both of yours have an economic impact, did you see anything, firstly, in some of the stuff you read and what you did, the current infrastructure and then the new infrastructure, because both of them have an economic impact. If you both answer that, if you've got anything.
Yeah, sure. So I tried to avoid it because obviously it opens up a big can of worms, depending on who you speak to. But the idea of changing our protein sources requires quite a bit of money, a lot of investment, and a lot of startups that are actually trying to do this are having to include research and development in the process to gain funding, to then prove that they can do it before they gain even more funding. Places like Kaila Farms, the Israeli-based cultured protein, they started with like very minimal millions of dollars. Very minimal millions of dollars sounds ridiculous, but they've their research and development has then meant that they've got something like a $105 million investment that then means that they can create some products that actually show that it can be done, which is then led to celebrities and the like investing in them. So there is like, it's a really difficult process to start. And then once it's started, it obviously can prove that it can replace our normal means of meat and whatnot. We'd like to think that governments would pick up on that, but of course that's a nice big wicked problem.
Well, it would be because you have the current infrastructure where people have their big cattle farms. So what would happen to that?
Yeah.
That's a question.
So there's a couple of ways in the way, like there's a couple of two mindsets almost in terms of it. So the main focus that a lot of people have on green hydrogen is specifically for use of heavy transport and decarbonising areas that aren't going to be electrified easily. So things like aviation and trucking. In those areas, we are having to create a lot of new infrastructure. So for trucking, we're having to create refueling stations, and because hydrogen it doesn't travel easily, essentially, we want the production to be quite close to where it's going to be used. So there is quite an infrastructure cost required to set it up. However, this is generally, hopefully, going to be offset later, but there is significant cost to set it up. In terms of there's another view where green hydrogen is going to be more almost universally used. So there's some talk about it replacing LPG and things like that. It's a smaller portion. It's not the dominant narrative. The dominant narrative is definitely industry specific. But if you look at it in the other way in terms of being more common use, then there's a lot of discussion about it can be quite successfully integrated into the current gas networks. They're looking at doing it in Australia and things like that too. And it is quite easy to use a lot of what we currently have in terms of infrastructure. Even in terms of storage, they're looking at ways for us to do it and either where we're currently storing gas or in mines and underground storage. So instead of having to build storage for it, we're essentially just having to do some leak proofing in some of the underground caverns and where we've done mining and things and store the hydrogen in there. So there's definitely a couple of ways to look at it, but we've got some of the infrastructure, but there is going to be quite a bit that has to go into it to make it work. The main thing is we have a lot of renewable energy generation, and it requires more, but we have more on the way already. So it's kind of, even if the renewable energy generation doesn't go directly towards green hydrogen, it's helping build an infrastructure that is going to be positive in other ways as well.
Thank you.
Did you have a question? I think Grace, is it Grace? Oh, no, there, go there.
No, Grace was one.
Oh, sorry,
we talked about
There you go.
Kate, yeah.
Hey, sorry,
That's okay.
we're having trouble identifying you by name. Anyway, Kate, yeah, Tawera was a really interesting comment. So I was really pleased with that. Especially as it's such a grand venture that, despite the very biased sample in this room, is not really very high profile or known and compared to Greaves. And so I wonder, your supervisor can answer this too, because it might be as well. I wonder, is it going to work long term?
Good question. Immediate thing that comes to mind is in popularity, it is increasing every year. Obviously took a bit of a hit with COVID, and international tourist journeys, whatever you want to call them, are quite a popular category of walker. So there's one way to look at it is number of walkers. I think it is looking to keep increasing, but it does feel like we are still, as I described, at this stage where we can shape what it becomes, when it becomes a place that, or a journey that is really marketed to tourists, trying to get them to come to New Zealand and walk this and maybe spend a bit of money along the way, or whether it is something a bit more than that, where it is a lot more tied to encountering and connecting with the New Zealand environment, and maybe less of a like tourism sale pitch as something that is also really encouraged for New Zealanders, which maybe already is a bit, but could be done more so. So can't remember the exact word you used, but in answer to your question, I think by itself it looks like it's going to keep gaining some momentum and gain profile as again there's more travel allowed. However, the way in which it does that, I think, is yet to be shaped, but hopefully it can become something that is not just about the number of walkers, but becomes something that is quite unique compared to these other, say, the Appalachian Trail or the Pacific Crest Trail, one that is a lot more about, connectedness and kaitiakitanga and encounter with landscape. So.
I have another question, but I'll wait and see if anyone else has any questions.
Does anyone have any questions for Grace? I've got one. What does onion juice, what would the application be?
Interesting one. I hadn't heard about it before I'd started this project, but it's actually shown to have benefits for your scalp and hair health. It's a bit of a home remedy at this stage, but also just with the vitamins, minerals, the quercetin, it is a health product. You can put it in some cooking and stuff. It's very interesting, but the next stage of this would be the consumer perception of whether it would be viable in terms of if someone would actually, I don't know, take a shot of it in the morning or whatever you'd like to think to do with it. But it has shown to be very beneficial for your hair health and regrowth, postpartum. So it's an interesting one, but it's definitely a cool idea to look at because there isn't many out there, clearly.
And is Onions New Zealand, is that a cooperative?
Yes, so it's made up of the growers, exporters, 85 commercial growers and 18 exporters, and it's pretty much just like a organization work together to try transform the onion industry.
Do you find in your interviews with members of that cooperative that there's any in some of the other industries that have cooperatives that I've looked at, like the hops industry, there's sort of people looking over the fence at, if I didn't have to collaborate as much, I would be able to move so much faster. Was there any sense that within the onion industry that maybe there's this tension between working together slows you down or not?
I haven't come across that yet. No, I wouldn't say so. It seems to be the larger growers, they really are leading and doing like a lot for waste already. So the smaller growers tend to follow that from what I've found. They're all just also really lovely people and just love to see each other flourish. I don't know, like I've had no really experience with that in a way, I guess. No.
I just had a question. Have you noticed or have you observed climate change and how it's affected Indigenous people without most recently? Like just through any media sources? Yeah.
I'm not quite sure because like there's not actually that much media coming out. It's so fresh. But we'll see if anything actually rolls out. But it's kind of obvious that so much climate change is happening because events are becoming more frequent, especially in smaller rural areas as well, which are services.
Yeah. I just happen to notice that a lot of the very sad stories that are rolled out happen to be low socioeconomic Māori and Pacific Island communities in South Auckland, where their houses have just flooded. They've just recovered somewhat, and now they're facing the cyclone as well. And it just was, when we're speaking, it just showed again that because they're sort of overrepresented in low socioeconomic society, that obviously they're affected by these sort of weather events as well.
Especially I'm from Gisborne, so it's very socioeconomic place, and then lost all connection. So I want to keep my whānau and seeing that there's a high Indigenous community as well. No one really looks into it actually in depth, and even civil defence are now we actually should probably start prioritising these areas. But now do you realise it when it's actually happening or what has happened?
we should do that as a convention.
Do you want to? Again?
Question to Pat. When I think of Tawera as a non-consumer myself, non-interactive with the landscape on that particular trail, you think of it as being some combination of wilderness and back.
Yeah.
But there must be a lot of it that's actually interactive.
Yes, yeah.
So how's that going? Because that's become quite an area of tension in New Zealand recently.
Yeah, definitely. And so it's mainly the North Island that's the case, as well as some parts of, let's say, I think it's Mount Linton Station near the, towards the South Island. I believe it's something where they really do have to work with landowners to get those permissions. I don't know much about that process myself. I think there's, like, from the perspective of the accounts I've read, there's quite varying perspectives on the farmland. Some find it really bothersome and hard walking, and others actually describe it as an opportunity to learn more about farming life in New Zealand, and about the history of those landscapes as well, both like natural history, like maybe particularly fertile land, and also cultural history and who that land may have used to belong to. So I think, I feel like I can't answer your question fully, sorry, but from the perspective of walkers, farmland is maybe a bit controversial in how it's appreciated, but I think it does have potential to, again, be a vehicle of connection, maybe not the same kind of connection as you'd have in one of these quote-unquote wilderness areas, but connection to, I guess, a part of New Zealand life that is quite deep-seated.
One last question from anybody online? Anybody want to drop in? Going once, going twice? Awesome. Thanks everybody from the panel. Wow, what a breadth of topics we've covered today in the morning sessions, and even just in the afternoon in those last five presentations. So thanks again to everybody that's presented, not just the effort of the presentation, but the efforts that's gone into all the mahi to understand your topic, to engage with the topic and with the communities that you've been involved with. I hope you've got a lot out of it, and I hope that you can see that the knowledge that you've been able to generate, that there's a place that people are there that can pick up the building blocks and build from there. Because I think that's a big part of the kaupapa of this initiative in today's symposium. Thanks to all the supervisors as well, been a big part in shepherding the work, all the sponsors. Thanks to everyone who showed up today, online and in person. It's been a really important part as well. Thanks to Pip for all the administration behind today to set all of that up and set up a lot of the scholarships themselves, and to Ray as well for being kind of the driving force behind the concept of Pūhau Anatera. So thanks again to everybody. A reminder that the journal is a thing that exists now as a website, and that you'll be hearing more about that as well. I'd just like to do a short karakia to close the meeting, and then feel free to hang around and chat with people afterwards if you've got the time, but thanks very much. Unuhia, 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 ki te uru tapanui, kia wātia, kia māma, te nākau, te tinana, te wairua, te ara, te kata, koia, rā e rongo, whakairia ake ki ronga. Kia tina, hui e taiki e. Kia ora, thanks everyone for listening.
That's